So, Mr. Chief Executive of the European Defence Agency, dear member of RS and dear friends, I am delighted to see you for this seminar in Brussels dedicated to the issue of defense innovation. I'm particularly happy to see you in place and not online. RS, our network of European researchers on defense industrial issues, was formed in 2016. Our aim was to reflect collectively between members of think tanks of the EU member states on how to build a competitive EDTIB that would allow the development of European strategic autonomy while answering the greatest level of security for Europe and its citizens, a question which seems a key one today, as it was never in the past with the aggression of Ukraine by Russia. Today, we have decided to devote this seminar to defense innovation. This is a work program in RS that we launched 2 years ago. The questions that arose were multiple. The phenomenon of the blurry borders of innovation from the civilian and military sector was increasingly important, and the European MOD were often seeking, in particular, to benefit from innovation coming from the civilian sector. To do this, reforms were more complex than one might think. The military sector is naturally not an open one due to the need to classify the information, but it was necessary to be able to benefit from this innovation coming from the civilian sectors and therefore to review the innovation structure managed by the MOD and also to review the management of armament program in order to better benefit from innovation coming from the civilian sectors. And from the outset, it appeared to us that these reforms carried at national level should be integrated into a European framework. These are the questions that we asked to the author of the 8 papers on defense innovation that are published from as many European countries. It is some of these papers that the speakers of the first roundtable will present today. And as for the Europeanization of defense innovation and the coordination of national policies, it has made its way with the European Defence Fund, with the European Commission communication on synergy between the industrial sector of the civil, military and space domain, and now with the Defence Innovation Hub established within the European Defence Agency, working in partnership with the Commission to increase and coordinate cooperation on defense innovation among member states. It is underlined in the strategic compass, and I see the strategic compass, adopted by the countries of the European Union last week. So the second roundtable will be an opportunity to talk about these European initiatives with representatives of both EU member states and the European institution. So I wish you an excellent seminar. And without further adding something, I give the floor to Jerry Sedivi, the Chief Executive of the European Defence Agency.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And indeed, it's a great pleasure to be here and that we can meet physically. And I wish to thank the RS network and indeed to you, Mr. Deputy Director Jean-Pierre Moni, for co-organizing this and indeed for inviting me to speak to you today on the crucial topic of defense innovation. The brutal war of aggression in Ukraine demonstrates in clear terms why we need to urgently strengthen European defense and why defense innovation is essential. And indeed, we've seen a series of important meetings and decisions to that end over the past few weeks. Now, the rapid development of new and often disruptive technologies and their fast weaponization, as well as innovative ways of using existing technologies in new combinations, show that innovation is a geostrategic factor shaping the international security environment and also global balance of power. The defense sector has often been at the forefront of innovation. However, to fully embrace defense innovation today, the European Union and its member states need to do much more, and we must do much more together. Joint innovation activities done in collaboration provide better value for money than today's fragmented efforts. As you may know, the European Defence Agency publishes an annual review of defense spending, and while the positive trend of increasing defense budgets continues with more and more member states committing now to 2% and beyond, we have 2% of GDP and beyond. We have seen a decline of the share of national defense expenditure allocated to cooperation with EU member states, be it for the joint development and procurement of equipment and capabilities, or also for defense research and innovation. Unfortunately, the share allocated to European collaborative equipment procurement has been dwindling continuously since 2016, and all that despite PESCO binding commitment to increasing joint and collaborative defense capabilities projects. And there is another of the binding PESCO commitments, and it's the share of expenditure that should be allocated to defense research and technology, which should be 2% of the total national defense spending. Currently, it's slightly over 1%, around 1.2% on average of total defense outlays of member states that are dedicated to defense R&D. Given the innovation imperative, how can our organization, the European Defence Agency, serve member states and their armed forces? One of the main tasks of the agency is to drive and promote technological innovation. And I would say that our agency has innovation in its DNA. Already in 2017-18, EDA conducted a far-reaching analysis of existing tools and strategies used to foster innovation, and this was analysis done across national, state, but also non-state corporate organizations, innovation actors. And based on this analysis, EDA developed a capability-driven innovation methodology, which is well tailored to defense needs. And it notably relies on EDA tools for technology watch and technology foresight to identify innovative solutions in a forward-looking perspective. EDA's involvement in the EU defense initiatives also contributes to strengthening innovation. The first coordinated annual review on defense, or CARD, not only analyzed the state of play of member states' defense spending, defense planning, and defense cooperation, but also proposed over 100 collaborative opportunities in capability development and research and technology, innovation included. Technology plays a fundamental role in terms of making possible the European ambitions, not only to act, but also to defend the EU interests in technology, security, and defense. However, when talking about innovation, we cannot and should not limit ourselves to technological progress. We all know that the innovation ecosystem is much wider than just technologies, and includes new strategies and operational concepts, as well as decision-making processes and organizations. And finally, indeed, building or cultivating, achieving a true culture of innovation. And EDA is already contributing to member states and Europe's efforts to boost defense innovation, and we are set to do much more. In May 2021, the EU Council called for reinforcing the role of EDA in fostering defense innovation, including disruptive technologies, and to that end, invited the head of the agency, Mr. Borrell, who is indeed at the same time High Representative, to present options to that end. And at our steering board, ministerial steering board in November last year, our ministers of defense had a first discussion on reinforcing the agency's role by creating what we call HEDI, or a hub on European defense innovation, as you mentioned it already, Mr. Deputy Director. And this is also now well foreseen in the strategic compass. So during this year, we are going to establish this innovation hub. And we believe that this new element will strengthen a already well-established agency innovation activities over the coming years in close coordination with the recently announced EU Defence Innovation Scheme in the Commission's defence package. Our discussions on the details of the hub continue as we speak with the member states, and especially with the research, technology, national armaments directors and capability planners communities. But let me assure you that EDA is already is ready to take up this important task by all means. And we are not starting from scratch. The existing innovation framework in EDA has given us the necessary tools to support member states in defense innovation. And I will give you a few good examples of EDA's innovation framework delivering actually results. The first one is the Euroswarm project, and this project started as a part of the pilot project for defense research, and was then continued by member states in a cooperative EDA ad hoc category B project. And essentially it relates to the combination of artificial intelligence and smaller drone swarms. Another good example is the STAS or STAS project, which stands for Standard Architecture for Soldier Systems. And this project started as our EDA operational budget study, was then followed by the GOSRA project funded under the also Preparatory Action for Defense Research, PADR, and is now introduced as a technology demonstration under the European Defense Fund Work Program 2021. So you can see how actually combination of various instruments, tools and frameworks could in the end deliver and develop concrete results. And indeed, this is also a good example of our close coordination with NATO, since the result of these projects means Estas and GOSRA contributed heavily to the development of the NATO generic soldier architecture, STANRAC. And last example, STYLE, is yet another good result where innovation started at the EDA through a relatively small study funded by our operational budget, resulting in a rapid prototyping, allowing member states to have a solid base to evaluate the technology. And indeed, this is focused on developing a multifunctional smart textiles for uniforms, also related therefore to the CARD focus area soldier systems. Now, these examples have been possible mainly thanks to two critical dimensions. First, EDA's contractual framework, which is light, flexible and agile. And indeed, we then managed to get results in very compressed contracting timelines. And the second, and most importantly, because in EDA, we bring together the research, technology, capability and industrial perspectives or dimensions together. And here I would like to underline the key role of EDA's capability technology working groups, which you may know as CAPTEX. And they are the engines that boost innovation by bringing together the necessary know-how to identify, develop and implement innovation to fill member states' defense capability gaps, while also promoting EU technological and industrial base. We have been providing this support based on three pillars. First one, identification of innovations and innovators following a systematic approach. Second, outreach to non-traditional defense innovators. And third, implementation of the innovative ideas through the CapTech communities. And implementation, this is where we are particularly limited by our current resources. And we are confident that the establishment of a defense innovation hub within the European Defence Agency will help us to speed up the delivery of technologies and innovations to the military end user. And please let me stress this message creation with this final message, which relates to the creation of military value and indeed addressing military capabilities. And this is the key purpose for past, present, and future innovation activities at the EDA. Now, a few additional thoughts on the reinforcement of our role in innovation. First, the credibility and effectiveness of our defense depends on the ability to act, but also to innovate. And defense innovation is intrinsically linked to Europe's ambition to be a credible and autonomous global security provider. In other words, those who do not innovate stay behind. Second, new non-traditional technology providers are emerging outside the traditional supply chains, but new innovators and innovations often have difficulties connecting with the military domain. And third, new funding instruments that are often bilateral and collaborative means we should move from the current innovation models based on prioritization and capability to models also including best funding instruments. In short, a holistic view of all innovation and funding schemes in the EU is needed, and this would enable EU defense innovation to use the best funding tool at the best time. By bringing all EU defense innovation under the umbrella, under one umbrella in the HEDI, in the Hub for Defense Innovation within the EDA, this would facilitate the creation of high military value and capabilities, and this, of course, in close coordination with the European Commission. I would also wish to highlight the mutual collaboration with NATO in this context, and both organizations indeed are engaging and each other, for example, in our Innovation Prize and Challenges events. And this collaboration will continue to expand in pace with developments in both organizations, the Innovation Hub within EDA and the Diana Accelerator within NATO. And indeed, we have a lot of staff-to-staff talks on my level. It's especially with the chief scientist of NATO or Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges or Defense Investment, but also we are in contact with the Allied Command Transformation. Before concluding my remarks, I would like to make two announcements. And the first is the EDA Defense Innovation Prize 2022, and the theme for this edition is related to the space domain, and the concrete details on the topic for the prize, the process to apply, and overall deadlines will be made public on our website very soon. And the call for proposals will be then open until the end of August. And the second one is for you to save the date for the first EU Defense Innovation Show organized by EDA that will take place on the 31st of May here in Brussels under the auspices of the French EU presidency. And this event will connect stakeholders across Europe, showcase existing innovation, exhibit prototypes, mock-ups or proofs of concept resulting from cooperative European project. So EU Defense Innovation Show, 31st of May. To conclude, I would like to underline again the commitment of EDA to defense innovation by the creation of the Hub on European Defense Innovation, and also to invite member states and industry to engage with our working bodies, CapTechs, project teams, working groups, and be part of our efforts for boosting defense innovation in Europe. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your brilliant speech. Good morning, everybody. We are very happy and pleased to have you all here. And also good morning to all the persons who are online. We have about 70 persons connected on Zoom or Teams. So welcome to them also. So I will have the pleasure to moderate the first panel of this morning on national perspective on defense innovation dynamics. So the goal of this first roundtable will be to discuss the way EU member states consider the necessity to review their defense innovation policy and the consequences of such changes for procurement policies, as well as the management of armament programs. And to discuss this very exciting topic, we are pleased to welcome today Valérie Mérandol. So you are a professor of innovation at the Paris School of Business, where you jointly head the new PIC chair with David Versailles since 2014. And you are the author of the RS policy paper, which opens this series of papers dedicated to innovation policy. So the first paper entitled The Revolution of Defense Innovation Models. Which I invite all of you to read if you haven't read it yet. We are also welcoming Andrea Gilli, coming straight from Italy for us this morning. So you are a senior researcher in military affairs at the Nato Defense College, and you are affiliated at the Center for International Security and Cooperation. And you are the author of the paper dedicated to defense innovation in Italy. And Martin Hurt, you are a research fellow at the International Center for Defense and Security in Tallinn. And previously you worked for the Estonian Ministry of Defense. And you wrote for RS the policy paper dedicated to defense innovation in Estonia, which was published in September 2021. And last but not least, online, we have Marcin Terekovsky. So you are head of International Security Program at PISM, the Polish Institute for International Affairs, based in Warsaw. And you are the author of the RS paper dedicated to defense innovation in Poland, which was released last week. So welcome to all of you. So the panel will be organized as follows. We will have 2 questions round from around 20 minutes each. And so we will keep about 45 minutes for Q&A with the audience and with the persons online. If you allow me, maybe before giving you the floor, I just wanted to do a short introduction to introduce this topic, and then I will switch to the first question. So the defense ecosystem has undergone a profound transformation last year, calling for reform of defense procurement and innovation processes. In several countries, the creation of public agencies dedicated to defense innovation, as well as the reform of procurement processes to integrate innovation at a faster pace, represent important milestones towards a restructuration of defense innovation management. Promote a user-centric approach of innovation, encourage open innovation, adapt civilian innovation to military needs, to military users, develop an incremental approach to integrate future technological breakthrough are examples of the main challenges to be addressed in the field of defense innovation. While some countries have undertaken important structural and cultural reforms in recent years to adapt their innovation policies, this dynamic is unequal depending on national cultures, and much remains to be done, whether in terms of risk acceptance, in terms of agility, or in terms of integrating innovation bricks into existing systems. So this was my short introduction, and I will leave you the floor. My first question, it will be the same to all of you. My first question is the following one. What is your assessment of the current situation in your country? So we will start with France regarding defense innovation policy, and what structural and cultural reforms were undertaken in recent years in your country. The floor is yours, Valérie.
Okay, thank you, Gaspar. So France is a very interesting case about structural reforms for innovation policy for different sectors. Recently, the French Ministry of Defense created the Defense Innovation Agency and the Defense Innovation Lab. These two organizations are closely linked. And the Defense Innovation Agency is tend to develop several initiatives based on open innovation. So the challenge for this agency is to create a connection between the Ministry of Defense with external actors of a defense industrial base, such as startups specialized in digital technology, robotics, or artificial intelligence. And there are several initiatives for connecting the Ministry of Defense with these new actors. For example, the Defense Innovation Agency wants to attract new startups, talented startups, and to identify the best startups for providing new solutions for the forces. So the challenge first is to identify the best startups. And so they work closely with incubators and accelerators in order to identify this kind of startups. And then the challenge is to convince them to work for defense market. So the agency has to communicate about the military needs, but also to find the relevant information about how it's possible to evolve on military markets and to integrate the constraints of the military markets. And at the end, the challenge is to provide also a new design for collaboration between the Ministry of Defense, the defense industrial base, and the startups. So to gain in flexibility in order to work rapidly with the startups, in order to identify rapidly the relevance of the new technological solutions. So for example, the Defense Innovation Agency tend to provide in collaboration with military forces, user cases, and also new rules and processes for developing fast experimentation in order to appraise rapidly the relevance of the new technological solutions. All these elements contribute to change the culture of innovation of the defense systems, but it's a long process and we are only at the departure. But the challenge is to work differently in the defense systems and not to work only on the techno-push approach. It means that techno-push approach means that at the departure there are technologies and we want to improve the performance of the technology and we want to manage all the process for the maturity of the technologies. But the challenge is to put at the center of the innovation processes other approaches, such as user-centric approach. So it means that the challenge is to put the users, the military, at the center of the process, not only for expressing the military needs, but also for exchanging, for developing co-creation processes, for giving feedback very rapidly at the early stage of the experimentation about the new solutions. And it's a big change of the culture, of the mindset, of routines. So it's complex. And just to finish, I just want to conclude that if these initiatives are launched by the Defense Innovation Agencies, there are other initiatives not managed by this agency. For example, the forces created military labs in order to connect by themselves rapidly with new startups, new actors in different ecosystems, and to work rapidly and to give the opportunity for military to express new ideas and new solutions and to test rapidly their solutions. So all these elements have to contribute to change the mindset and to create a new design of collaboration between the Ministry of Defense, the industry, and the university inside the defense industrial base, but also with other actors outside.
Thank you very much, and thank you for perfectly respecting the timing. So, Andrea, the floor is yours. How are things working in Italy?
Okay, so thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be back in Brussels after a couple of years. So everything I say is personal opinion only. It does not reflect the positions of NATO, the NATO Defense College. I'm just happen to be Italian, and for that reason, I speak about Italy. And I thank obviously my co-author, who is Alessandro Marrone, who I guess many of you know is an expert on Italy and defense, and we wrote together the paper. My understanding on Italy is kind of reflects some of the things I've just heard. third, but with some different tastes, meaning that if we think about innovation, there are different types of innovation, first of all. And you can think of evolutionary innovation, you can think of radical innovation. In my sense that the Italian defense ecosystem moves towards either evolutionary innovation or tries to jump into more radical or architectural through, especially in the long term, looking through the European Defense Fund projects. So that's my understanding of how, for instance, it's conceived. Then if we think about innovation and we think about the digital revolution we're observing, we can think that either there's a major change with respect to the past. So we're moving from industrial age, where economies of scale were leading, to the digital age, where demand side economies of scale matters. So basically networks effects. Why make this different? This difference? Because if we think in traditional terms, you do technology list, you push, you identify the areas where you want to lead, you do research and development investments, and you try to build defense industrial base. And my feeling is that the Italian approach goes a bit more in that direction. If you think in terms of like the Silicon Valley software is eating the world approach, where you have network effects which are leading, and this matters because basically the first company, the first mover eats the entire market. You think of innovation as developing solutions, and for those solutions, you need first an ecosystem able to enable companies to pop up, and then the ecosystem also enabling those companies to scale, and this relates to human capital. So my feeling is that Italy is not really yet in that direction, and there's no judgment in my assessment. I'm not saying one is right or wrong. I'm just saying how I see things. However, there are some policies which are being taken. So in 2020, there was a strategic concept inside of the Italian military, which was trying to promote innovation on digital technologies. There was also the innovation hub created by the Defense Innovation Center, which tried to connect startups and companies and organizations working on defense, which are attempts to involve a broader audience. But my understanding is probably is not as developed as some of the activities we just heard. It's definitely that there are three key changes to consider. One is the Italian version of the recovery plan, which promotes a lot of focus on innovation, the connection with the European Defense Fund, which is really seen as a leverage to basically promote probably more disruptive or modular or architectural innovations. And the last one is last week decision from the Italian Parliament to increase defense spending, and probably that's which is kind of if will be maintained, is an important change, because it could lead to additional resources to innovation. However, and for the sake of time, I'm going to try to close in shortly. I would say that innovation is mostly concentrated on prime contractors, or the big companies, is mostly procurement centered. So it's related to big procurement programs. And for those reasons, probably it also faces, especially the more radical type of innovation, some barriers, which are in part cultural and in part institutional. Cultural is that, I lived for a few years abroad. My feeling is that in general, especially Italian schools, the Italian society do not promote creativity, innovation, probably as, in my personal view, they should, or definitely as other countries probably do. The institutionals are probably long-standing and reflects the fact that Italy has a lot of norms and regulations, for good and bad, some understandably so, but we definitely, in a way, constrain companies, especially small companies, to grow. Last thing, some of the accelerators or the acceleration process of startups is either internal to prime contractors or to state-owned organizations which promote state investments, or occurs through mergers and acquisitions. And so it's in a way, it's institutionally is a different type of process, but there are also some accelerators. So I stop here. Thank you. I hope I was in time.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Andrea. I would now give the floor to Marcin. Marcin, can you hear us? So what's your assessment of the current situation in Poland? Thank you.
Thank you, Gaspar. Thank you for having me online. It's a pleasure, although I'd love to be there with you in person, but some conditions made it impossible. Nevertheless, I've enjoyed the presentation by Mr. Studivi and now the panel. Let me say before I start that, of course, even if I'm an analyst within the Polish Institute of International Affairs, which is a public body, I only speak for myself, so I do not present the position of the government or the industry for that matter. This is just the result of my analysis, which you can also read in the paper. Well, now, what is the situation in Poland as regards defense innovation? I'd say it's a mixed bag, and it's difficult because the conditions are very special. Since 2014, and Russian, and as we are now seeing the beginning of the Russian aggression on Ukraine, which culminated this year on February 24th, Poland has been very much focused on rearming the military, getting new capabilities as fast as relatively possible. This combined with the specific state of the Polish national defense technological and industrial base, which still had some issues with legacy technologies and is developed, I would say, quite unevenly with some competitiveness in certain technology areas and lack of competitiveness, frankly speaking, in other technology areas. So these two drivers, so to say, they need to get capabilities fast, also because of the aging legacy post-Soviet systems. And the fact that the industry has been seen as largely incapable of delivering these capabilities fast, influenced the decisions to go for basically offsets, government-to-government agreements, and buying off-the-shelf equipment. This is the case of the biggest programs, the programs of air missile defense, the Wisła program, in which the Patriot systems are being procured. They will have some, let's say, Polish industrial share, which may entail some innovation. This is the idea, but it's up in the pipeline to see the results. Next, the decisions of F-35, clearly not that much perspective for innovation in that closed American ecosystem. Then the decision on the Abrams tanks, quite recent one. Again, it's up to be seen how many, if any, industrial share will go to Polish companies, and the question about innovation is I would say theoretical in this regard. Basically, this of course has to be seen in the context of the threat perception. The perception has always been that there is a threat of war in Europe because of Russia and because of Russian strategic goals. Now, on February 24th this year, this assessment, this perception was validated, and the situation in the eastern flank, the fact that Poland is now at the forefront, supplying, serving as a hub for supplies of Ukraine and welcoming the biggest number of Ukrainian refugees in Europe, this increases actually the threat to Poland. Ergo, this may actually reinforce the trend of getting capabilities fast through G2G off the shelf. However, at the same time, we have seen both first results of defense innovation, though not EDTs. We're not speaking about AI robotics. We're speaking about things like drones, like standard service rifle, or I would say, flagship national program, the new tracked infantry fighting vehicle, which is designed at home, which involved a lot of innovation work, so to say. So if we limit innovation to this kind of standard, let's say, typical technology areas, which we know, not speaking about emerging and disruptive technologies, leaving them aside for a moment, then we have seen first results of national innovation efforts in technology demonstrators or actual systems like the self-propelled howitzer, which actually began service. With regards to EDTs and the future of innovation, two more very important steps have been taken. In 2020, the new defense innovation policy was announced by the Ministry of National Defense. It is being implemented. We should have this year a programming document referring to EDTs and to ways of reaching out to startups, incubators, and the ways of streamlining this private sector and defense sector efforts so that they meet military needs. And we have the new just launched this year on January 3rd, 2022, Armaments Agency, a long-awaited centralized body which is meant to coalesce a bit on the following the French model of the DGA, to coalesce the entire capability development management, so to say, system. So these two elements give, let's say, allow to assume that there will be a change as regards Polish approach to defense innovation, and the change may be substantial because it is has been just decided. We'll see how the implementation will go, that Poland will reach 3% of GDP starting from the next year because of the situation in the eastern flank. And there is a big discussion now among Polish experts how to make sure that the additional money will go more to the national defense technological industrial base and defense innovation. Finally, various word to this opening question. The future of the defense innovation in Poland, because of the structural issues with regards to the national companies, the defense businesses, is in the collaborative programs. Because if we speak about EDTs, then Poland expressively is interested in using multilateral frameworks, the Nato, Diana, Accelerator, the fund, and also the European Defense Fund, or perhaps in the first place, to work on these very high-end technologies in a collaborative ways. In a final sentence, I think that we have had a mixed bag results, so to say, but the future is much more promising, though I would not expect Poland being a champion on EDTs this or next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Very interesting. So things are quite different than in France and Italy, but are slowly changing. That's a good news. Now I will give the floor to Martin Hurt to tell us how are things going in Estonia. I mean, Estonia is at the forefront of defense innovation. So what's your assessment of the situation and what reforms were undertaken in the last years? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gaspar. And first, I would like to thank the organizers for arranging this event and for inviting me to speak here today. Second, I would like to say, of course, that I do not, my views do not represent the views of the Estonian Ministry of Defense in any way. First, a couple of words about the historic background about defense-related R&D in Estonia. First important aspect is that Estonia does not have a traditionally heavy defense industry, meaning that most of defense procurement that is done in Estonia is based on import from other countries. Second, and I think that our French colleague referred to this as well, putting the user's perspective in the center of defense-related R&D is a challenge. It has been a challenge since the early 90s in Estonia. If the Ministry of Defense would have waited for the military to define operational requirements, technical requirements, the MOD would have had to wait for this until this day, and there would be no defense-related R&D in Estonia. Instead, the MOD decided to take the initiative already quite many years ago and to initiate processes directly with small companies that were interested in defense as well, but were already established in the civilian sector, producing civilian products. And one core activity that the Estonian Ministry of Defense has been doing for quite a number of years is to organize annual competitions for grants. And even if these competitions did not produce big results or impressive results in the early years, this has now changed. And there is a myriad of many small companies that are focusing on specific niches such as ICT, cybersecurity, AI, robotics, health technology, and so on and so forth, who have at some point in time decided that they want to get involved also in the defense sector. So in Estonia, according to MOD policy, innovation is primarily focused on enhancing the export potential of private companies, but it also provides the means to engage the defense forces in activities that eventually stimulate military interest to incorporate more high-tech solutions into capability development. So there is an interaction between the Ministry of Defense, the private industry, and the defense forces. And step by step, the steps are very small, but the defense forces are also taking on board more innovative approaches. I will spare you the organizational developments in Estonia. I think briefly we have consolidated all efforts related to defense procurement from 2017. We have established one single point of contact for innovation activities, where private companies can engage with the National Defense Academy to engage military end users early in the innovation projects to assess the relevance of innovative solutions in real military operational and tactical environment. And this is, of course, extremely important, that whatever money is spent through the defense budget on innovation is likely to generate results and be operationally relevant. One interesting aspect I would like to mention is that despite the recent creation of a cyber command in the Estonian Defense Forces on one hand, and as well as a vibrant cybersecurity startup and enterprise ecosystem on the other, Estonia has until recently lacked an open and flexible platform for the experimentation of new concepts related to cyber defense. To address this shortfall, the Ministry of Defense 2 years ago established a new platform called CR14. It is a non-profit organization. It is developing and managing a cyber range already in use by the Estonian Defense Forces Cyber Command and other stakeholders. The purpose of this effort is to establish an open cyber range that can be used not only by the defense forces, but also by cybersecurity innovators, including enterprises, startup companies, and even individuals who want to conduct exercises and test new ideas and technologies. And this is another step driven by the Ministry of Defense in order to speed up innovation and to increase export potential. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all respecting the timing. It's impressive. If you agree, I think we will switch to the second question round. So the second question round is more about procurement. So my question to all of you would be, what were the impacts of this reform of defense innovation on procurement policies? And what steps do you believe are necessary in the next year to pursue the opening of the defense innovation ecosystem? So we will start with you, Marcin. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So, well, as I signaled, there has been effects of innovation policy on procurement in the area of, let's say, classic, if I wish, technologies. So not the EDTs. So I think that the biggest upcoming program, a program in which we have just heard some news that actually some first demonstrators will be delivered to the armed forces for tests this or next year, is this tracked infantry fighting vehicle Borsuk. So this is basically an indigenously developed platform, which of course integrates components from the global market, but it is a very much a national development, so to say. And it does integrate most modern technologies. Of course, not everything is yet clear. The specifics are not that open in detail to the wider public, but it seems that it is one of the most modern infantry fighting vehicles which you may have. And this is, I would say, an indigenous program. And parts of these programs are actually results of national system for supporting defense innovation, which was established in its, let's say, original version some years ago, around 10 years ago, with grants from both the military agencies, the Armaments Inspectorate, and the civilian National Center for Research and Development, which have been supporting grants for developing certain technologies. So this is perhaps the biggest program. I mean, if it launches, we will need perhaps as much as 1,000 of such infantry fighting vehicles to replace the aging post-Soviet BMP, basically, which is BWP called in Polish. One of the elements which you may notice with this program is the requirement of floatability, so that the platform, the vehicle can cross the rivers, actually can float. This was a very specific Polish requirement. And there are cases of, let's say, less ambitious innovation, if you wish, either with regards the depth of the value of the program, which I can discuss in more detail. I will spare you that, as Martin said, but I will mention as from smaller stuff, let's say the Grot service rifle, the 556 modular service rifle, which was developed again indigenously as a replacement to the Beryl and other guns which had themselves roots in Soviet constructions of basically the AK model or the AKM model used widely in the Cold War. I mean, in all the Warsaw Pact militaries, including Poland. So even if we speak about relatively not that state-of-the-art technologies, I mean, this is just a basic service rifle, and the value of the program is not, that big. It is still a very important case of Polish system, if you wish, ability to spend money on research and development and introduce a system which is corresponding to, which addresses the needs of the armed forces and is considered a very mature system, in the sense that it has been already in production and being put into service. And not being expert on firearms, there are technical analysis showing that this is quite a good rifle, so to say. The handling, the modularity, and so on and so forth. And it will be offered, of course, also commercially. So I mean, I put two different things on two different ends of the scale, two different projects, or an entire IFV and the rifle, which both kind of have, in which both the innovation or research and development effort resulted in procurement. But of course, there is also the typical, I would say, R&D efforts, nationally sponsored, and they had, and also collaborative, because perhaps this is also where we would like to talk about it. So we have seen cases of many cases of national support for smaller innovative works on technologies, mostly in the areas in which Polish research centers or companies have technological advantages. They are competitive and actually can absorb the funds and provide some results. So this is mostly military electronics, some robotic systems, and the fact that there was, let's say, a seed into this kind of work resulted in the participation of the Polish companies in such projects like Ocean 2020, the EU supported projects from the preparatory phase of the EDF, or in the GOSRA, which was mentioned by Mr. Sedivi, where we had other case of defense innovation, kind of moving to the procurement, not the procurement level, but moving to the further steps of developing programs. And this is, and I will now look for a moment on this. This is bottom-up driven innovation of small and medium enterprises. We have seen cases, the biggest is one of the Polish companies which is working on military electronics and drones. And they have been designing drones bottom up from the scratch and actually trying to find markets for that, including Polish market. these drones, the ISR systems or the loitering munition, some of them are being now allegedly supplied to Ukraine. Let's say there has been information on that in the open source media. And these are kind of outliers in the sense that what has been also said, I think, but Andrea, that in Italy you have this very much prime contractors focus and big programs focus innovation. This was also the case in Poland. I mentioned this Borsuk infantry fighting vehicle. This is one of the top Polish programs, so to say. So the innovation is very much centered on the prime contractor, the Polish armaments group, with all its being a holding for its companies, state control. So the innovation comes in the system. But we have also cases of innovation with your own funds done by small and medium enterprises, private companies who are able to develop systems, who are looking for cooperation at the European level to find markets for the products or at least components, or are able, we have these cases, to sell licenses. And this is the area which is perhaps expected to drive to grow the most, with the need to actually spend money on capabilities and have a spillover of that increased defense expenditure, the 3% of GDP starting from next year, on the national defense technological industrial base. You cannot do it just pumping the money to the big prime contractors. There is interest, there is willingness, and I hope it will be implemented to support SMEs too, and to have results in the form of procurement here. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Martin, what's your impression on the impact of the defense innovation reforms on procurement policy in Estonia, and what next steps do you believe are necessary? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the very good question. It is there is no strong linkage between defense-related R&D in Estonia and the procurement policies. The overall guiding principle of not only the Ministry of Defense but also the whole government is obviously that it should all be based on free market competition rather than strategic partnerships. There are exceptions, but of course I know that the private companies believe that strategic partnerships should be more common. So I don't really see that this will change very much in Estonia. Successful development of products made by grant-winning enterprises are still procured, so it doesn't exclude the possibility that good products are procured by the Estonia Defense Center for Defense Investment. But there could be a stronger link, of course, between R&D and procurement policies as such. Opening up the defense ecosystem to civilian innovation, in our case, I think it is more or less already accomplished, because there are no old traditional defense companies, as I mentioned. It is pretty much based on young, relatively fresh companies that are already successful in the civilian market and have in most cases already seen possibilities to earn money also in the defense sector. But in most cases these companies are actually devoting time and effort to the defense market as a kind of side activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I just lost the connection with the persons online, so if just someone could maybe check for the Q&A after, or I won't be able to take your question for the person online. So thank you very much. Thank you, Edouard. Well, things are quite different in France. Between there is a strong link, I think, between procurement policy and innovation policies. So maybe Valerie, you can tell us a bit more about this.
Yes. I identify 3 main challenges for the future. The first challenge is about the change of culture of innovation. I said before that we are at the departure of a new model, and it's a long-term process, but the challenge is to manage this transformation. And perhaps there is a lack of management in the long-term perspective of these transformations. So for managing these transformations, there are 2 points. First, encouraging the mobility of competencies and people between civilian and military markets in order to encourage new practices, new mindset, new vision of innovation in a long-term perspective. And second point, it's also very important to improve the development, to support the development of intermediaries. I told you about the Defense Innovation Agency and the Defense Innovation Lab and the military labs, and they play a key role as intermediary for connecting the different industrial base with other kinds of actors in new and develop new relationships. But there are other kinds of intermediaries. For example, there are incubators specialized in defense and security projects, like Starbucks, like Strategic, etc. They contribute to connect and to create new forms of collaboration in long-term perspectives. There are also the intermediaries initiated by the large companies that operate as the integrator of systems. I think about Thales or Naval Group. They create specific labs for connecting with new actors. For example, Thales in cybersecurity in Station F, in order to attract new actors who have never worked on defense issues. So it's very important to support the development of these intermediaries and the networking of these intermediaries and the complementarity of these intermediaries in order to diffuse new value, new way of working, new collaboration, design, etc. etc. The second challenge is about the acquisition policy. And I think we are only at a departure of the necessity of change the acquisition policy in France. In fact, today, the main initiatives are to attract and to identify new technological solutions provided by external actors of a defense industrial base. Okay, it's very interesting. But the challenge for the future is to be able to exploit rapidly these new technological solutions. And it's a big challenge because many of these new technological solutions are based on the short cycle of development, while the big programs, the military programs are based on a long cycle of development. So for me, the main challenge is to change the architecture of military programs and to manage differently the military programs by integrating more modularity, by integrating open architecture. So this is a big change of practices, change of decision-making process, change many changes. And for these changes, it's very important to develop partnership between the Ministry of Defense and the acquisition policy, the acquisition agency, the DGA, and also the large companies in charge of the development of the integration of systems. And we don't have developed this kind of partnerships. And I think for the future, it will be a mandatory process. And the last challenge, perhaps the most tricky of the challenge I have identified, is about the security of the supply chain. In the context of closed model of innovation, it was easy to manage it. The security of the supply chain was based on the development of a defense industrial base. But today, in the context of open innovation, it's not possible to do the same. And perhaps the concept of defense industrial base is outdated or partly outdated. I mean that defense industrial base is very important and some of critical capabilities are located inside, but today many critical technologies are located outside the defense industrial base. It means that it's very important to change the rules for the security of the supply chain. We have to think of different ecosystems, strategic ecosystem for defense. And the weaknesses and the strengths of these weaknesses are not the same. The influence of the Ministry of Defense are not the same depending on the ecosystems. The degree of internationalization are not the same, etc., etc. So it means that we have completely to adapt the rules depending on the ecosystems. And we have to think differently. We have to create more transversal approach. We have to break silos about how to manage it at the national level, but I think also at the urban level. And we have to reshuffle completely the way of thinking about it. And it's a huge challenge for all people and all the politicians, but also the experts inside the system, because we have to change the mindset.
Fully agree. Thank you very much. Andrea, the floor is yours. So how do you see things in Italy?
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, in Italy, when we refer to France and French people, we say of cousins. And so I can say what I just heard is I'm very familiar. So I think it's very interesting. So rather than repeating, because some of those issues are very similar, I probably would add a couple of considerations, which are, so if we think that software is eating the world, so it's becoming more and more prominent also in defense and in major weapon systems. And we know that software is never done. So software is not really a product that you deliver, but it's more like an iterative service in a way. So to what extent is procurement changing, defense procurement changing in Italy? My sense is that has been changing, but this is at least a 10 or 15 years old process, but has not changed more recently in order to favor startups and so-called disruptive innovators. There is definitely what my understanding and my knowledge of the regulations, there is not a fast procurement process. So in the United States, especially, there are different ways to, with DIUX, for instance, to try really to incorporate small companies. It really doesn't work this way yet. However, if we look as a test for kind of the argument, we see that in general, defense procurement in Italy does not observe delays and cost overruns like we observe in other countries. So I would say, well, it's a parameter to see how things go. And so I would say it relatively really works, probably because of a strong cadre of procurement experts inside the office. The regulations are, however, not changing. And so this matters because, again, one thing is procurement of a product, one thing is acquisition of a service in which you want to change constantly. This brings to the issue of talent. As said, so talent inside procurement experts, it has worked so far, but as we moved, for instance, we will move towards big combat cloud, AI, and so forth. The question is the procurement talent prepared and skilled for this transition or not? I don't know, but building on the experience from other countries, I would say that probably won't be that easy because it's not really only a matter of skills, it's only a matter of culture, of how you see the issues. The last but not least, and this applies to, it's not only a issue that concerns Italy, but is the paperwork that small companies need to comply with in order to enter in business with the Defense Department. And this equally applies to Italy. And so in a way, so far, the issue has been solved just by these companies either cooperating with big prime contractors or directly being acquired by big prime contractors, which is good probably in terms of delivery of solutions, but you could think that this is bad because this means that there's no way of direct access. So that's the way it's the state of the art. I don't know, but it's possible that a procurement reform will occur in the next few years, but I don't have the crystal ball, and so I cannot predict it.
Maybe if I can just add a question, is it like in Estonia, do you have a single point of contact at the Italian MOD for innovation matters? Not really, because you talked about a lot of paperwork and difficulties.
So, I mean, I would say, there was a story in the 60s that all economists around the world could not understand how the Italian economy could do so well, despite all the reasons that it should have gone much worse. And the metaphor was the hornet, the big bee, which from a physical perspective should not be able to fly, but still it does fly. And so I guess, and then there was in Italy, economically, it was like the hornet. And I think here probably something similar, that at the end, things work, and things in a way, they work in a way that is not probably intuitive, but it works. They're definitely different. It's the same when you look at defense spending. So part of the defense spending, the research and the development part is actually funded by the Ministry of Economic Development in Italy. So it's probably, there are different point of entries which may not be intuitive. Like the Italian MOD created this Center for Defense Innovation, which in turn created an innovation hub. But then you have the CDP, is Cassa dei Depositi e Prestiti, which is, I don't know, like would be like a private equity under the government, which funds different type of innovation, and they have also supporting their own accelerator. I would not say there is a single point of entry. but the system, in a way, it has its own flexibility to accommodate innovation, although it gives often the impression that there is a degree of rigidity.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you for this very interesting and enlightening presentations. We have 40 minutes left for the Q&A. So I will take the questions from yes. I think there is a mic. You can just wait a few seconds. And also for the people who are connected online, don't hesitate to ask your questions. There is a chat, so I will pick up the questions. For now, we don't have any questions online, but feel free to ask your questions. If you could maybe just introduce yourself, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Brice Godin, I am working at Soprasteria Benelux. I have a question to the panel regarding the main actors in the field of innovation. When it comes to have together MODs, big players that I will call integrators, and startups, how do you see this playground doing well? Do you think that the member states should be involved in the way to create some glue around these actors? Because sometimes there are some frictions could happen, because at the end of the day, the MODs and the armed forces are using systems of systems. So it's not so easy for a startup to, I would say, to be part of this process, of this development process and so on. Thank you.
To go first. Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you for this question. I think it's one of the big issues today about open innovation and the role of the Ministry of Defense and Defense Innovation Agency. The challenge for future is not only to connect to startup, the Ministry of Defense to startup, but also to work closely with large companies in order to develop new solutions. And I think perhaps for the moment, the main relationship will be between the Ministry of Defense, Defense Innovation Agency, and the startups. And we have forgotten sometimes the large companies inside these networks. So I think it will change in the future, and it will be a mandatory process, because if we want to integrate the new solution, it will be very important. But as in comparison in other sectors, like in healthcare, et cetera, sometimes it's quite difficult to manage this kind of relationships. So it takes time. But we are not, I think we are late in this process. We need to improve the partnership between startup, large company, et cetera. And perhaps, yes, the Ministry of Defense have to play a role as a glue, but for evolving and changing this role and creating this new connection, the change of culture and how the Ministry of Defense and Defense Innovation Agency see its role, it takes time. So I think that's the reason why the relationship is not completely improved today.
So I would just add that, especially if we think about some of the emerging and disruptive technologies, in my view, the key challenge is ensuring product customer fit or product market fit. So making sure that we want to develop AI, okay, but what's the problem we're trying to solve? Because those technologies are not going to work because we just develop AI. It has to be, there must be a kind of a business case. What's the problem? And ensuring this is a first challenge, because it requires that there is a strong and close dialogue between the users and the manufacturer. Once this is a problem of adoption, which refers to regulation, and probably a glue at the European level could work, but it's to be seen whether, to what extent is a push or pull factor, but it can definitely help. The third is about scale. And here the question, and there was the discussion, the issue the other day with the United States about data sharing, how much a single market at the European level is sufficient for scaling, and no. Now, when I hear oftentimes is that Europe needs to have continental-wide economies of scale for the digital economy. And that's a good argument. But then if you think about South Korea, is not big as the European Union, and they still could kind of take off on digital technology. So it definitely helps, and having a bigger market is important. But probably the issue is more about ecosystem, having the institutions which, regardless of the scale, of the size, sorry, of your market, enables you to scale. And these, I guess, it's a matter of culture, institution, regulations, and so forth.
Marcin, if you want to add something, feel free to take it.
Yes, I'd like to say, I mean, with regards to the question on which actor is prevailing in Polish case, I mean, it is definitely the MOD, so the government, and the big and the prime contractors, because simply, I mean, this all stems from the threat perception. I know it may sound very generic to you, but this is very much the case. I mean, what is driving capability planning in Poland in general, and particularly now, after the Russian invasion in Ukraine, is the threat and the perspective of the need to actually address the Russian threat in the coming years. So if you take this as an outset, then it's clear that there need to be a kind of a, let's say, special approach to innovation, in which Andrea mentioned the business case. I'd say that, and we discussed earlier, if there is an entry point in the MOD or in the system for startups, incubators, and private innovators, private SMEs, basically. I mean, in Poland, we have established the Defense Innovation Directorate within the MOD, and there is this new new defense innovation policy with the document, which is expected this year. But the goal of the document is to actually tell the industry, the businesses, the innovators, hubs, what are the capability needs and technologies related from capability needs of the armed forces. So this is, there is clearly, as I was arguing, an outreach to work together more with defense, with innovators, so to say, and to seek for potential military applications of innovations in civilian industry. But the overarching logic is not, is very, I mean, it is not, I would argue, commerce-based, but threat-based. So to say that if there is a technology identified in Poland, developed by the civilian industry, by a startup, by an incubator, which may contribute to the armed forces acquiring a capability, then the support of the state is meant to follow. We're still waiting for the document. We see about the instruments, but at the outset, I mean, at the core of the approach is the capability needs driven by threat perception. And this is perhaps what makes Polish case with regards to defense innovation, but also broader defense industrial policy a bit different than the non-flank nations with also much stronger defense national DTIBs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions in the room? We also have a question online. Actually, it's maybe more a question for the second roundtable, but I will read it. So how do you think the European or transatlantic defense industry will be affected by the NATO Innovation Fund and by the NATO Defense Innovation Accelerator? How do you evaluate these initiatives at this point? Will it enhance the development of transatlantic R&D programs? And will European SMEs have more opportunities to enter the US market? Who would like to answer this question first? But if you don't want to answer it, we can also ask it in the second round table. So feel free to skip it.
No, well, I mean, I always speak at, oh, well, Marcin wants to speak. Please, Marcin.
Okay, I mean, I'm using the online position, so I wave. No, I mean, a very good question by Pavel. And I think that now stepping up, a bit out of my role here in this panel as a person who presents the Polish approach, I think that the EDT is very much, so the NATO Innovation Fund and Defense, the Diana Accelerator, that this is, in my opinion, the chance to actually have also at the political level, or perhaps mostly the political level, to have the defense industrial tensions between US and Europe solved. So basically, as I can see, and all the defense industrial interests of the top armament producers in Europe make it inevitable that there will be, this is the strategic goal of Europe, to develop technologies which are competitive to the US technologies, to have an offer in certain capability areas and niches which can compete with American offer. We speak of MGCS, FCAS, but also missile, let's say, technologies which are now being developed with like Twister, for example, program in PESCO. So we will have competition there, and we already hear from Americans that, well, you know, you need to buy capabilities, but of course we need to work closely, and of course don't forget about American capabilities. But so here the tension will be sustained. To alleviate it, I think, maybe I'm naive in that approach, but to alleviate it, a closer transatlantic cooperation on EDTs, on stuff like standardization, on developing common, you know, language for how to work with military AI, for instance, the big data, cloud-based operations. This is where we can actually have projects which will not only, I hope, bring practical results, allowing the American and European militaries to talk to each other, to operate together in the future battlefield, but also to give the politicians, basically, the leaders, cases in which they can say that, okay, here are the areas in which we compete, and our industrial interests are incompatible, frankly speaking, but there are areas in which we work hand in hand, and in which European defense, so let's put a broad denomination on that, broad term, the European defense strengthening does not, or actually does help the transatlantic bond. This is my rough argument, which I've been making for some time, but I'm happy to hear also your comments on my take of this issue. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would add a couple of words. The first is, I guess, and it's only partially connected, but a question we probably should be asking ourselves is, given what we are seeing in Ukraine, to what extent the focus in innovation has to remain so important in the years ahead. What I mean to say is that what the war in Ukraine is showing is that innovation, disruptive and emerging technologies are not really reshaping the battlefield. And what is making the difference is modernization or traditional military power, which is way more expensive than innovation. Because one thing is to invest 1 million or 2 billion on emerging and disruptive technologies. One other is to rebuild the European armed forces, which is going to be much more expensive. And that's a first issue, which I don't enter the discussion, but that's, I think, a point which is worth mentioning. The second is, and more specifically to the EDF Diana issue. Well, my personal opinion is that definitely those type of initiatives are useful insofar as some EU/NATO countries have not fully adopted the innovation gospel. What is probably important is that we try to avoid duplication, but this does not mean that competition is bad. No, I mean, that probably a certain degree of competition can actually be positive because it can push for delivering solutions better, more effectively, and so forth. But there is a part of the question with which I do not agree, and was whether the US market will be open to European startups. Well, I think it sees the problem in the traditional terms, because if a market is open and is bigger, the risk is that the startup directly moves. You don't. So, and this is something that we have to think when, especially some startups, I mean, DeepMind at the beginning was literally not a couple, but very few people. What happened is Google bought it up. So if you have some very, very forward-looking startups, can be small, if there's an opportunity, they just may move. And probably keeping the transatlantic market open is important, but at the same time, this reinforces the need for the ecosystem we have been talking about. The last issue, which I would like to emphasize, because I mean, despite my initial comments, all my academic research is primarily about innovation, is that both the EDF and the Diana, the important feature is that you empower program managers who are really competent and try to keep the organization kind of flat and horizontal. In my view, what we know from innovation in general is that if the technologies are picked up top down and with little product market fit, the risk is that you create a great technology, but it won't be used or adopted. And that's not really what we probably want. And my comment, I have no idea of how the two are working. So I have no idea what stage they are.
Just to conclude, I agree with my partner, but I think we have to be pragmatic because in this context today with the war of Ukraine, etc., we are more interdependent than ever. So the challenge is not to forget to develop critical capabilities in Europe, but also to be pragmatic in order to develop in the future the capability we need and also at the short-term perspectives. So for me, the main challenge is to be able to be efficient and to think collectively. So developing collective strategy at the level of ecosystems. And when we have strengths, we have to be develop strong capabilities in Europe. When we are not so lot of capability, we have to work differently with different kind of partners. We need to be more pragmatic because we have to develop several perspectives, short-term perspective, long-term perspective with a lot of interdependency. It's not possible to develop alone all things. So we have to to try to influence all the process and to find the relevant collective strategy for developing both, sometimes in Europe, sometimes in the Nato level, but think ecosystems can help us to develop more relevant capabilities at different moments.
Thank you. I think we have a question from the audience. Renaud.
Thank you, Renaud Bellet, NVDA. My question is, do we have a missing link between the R&D, which is like EDF and many systems, and the procurement approach? Because most of the time, even though there is a public funding for R&D, for innovation, we have no transition to acquisition, because we see a very structured long-term planning of acquisition. Even though countries don't have a long-term plan for acquisition, there is a process. And so sometimes a bright guy could come up with a magnificent idea. There is no room for investing in capabilities. And here is a big step. Even in the US, you see many very interesting innovation, which are supported until the prototype phase. And then there is no acquisition, or at least at the short term. And we have a disconnection between the logic of innovation and the logic of procurement here in most countries. And so I can figure out that for many countries, there is no margin of maneuver to add non-allocated resources. But can we imagine that at the EU level, we can have like a buffer space to give some experimentation and a very short series production to test and evolve also the solution, because most of the time innovation is not perfect at the beginning. So we have this user-producer interaction, which is very useful. So can we have a support of the European Commission or EU at large to have some specific budget to test and nurture new innovation which complement EDF?
Would like to start?
Okay. Yes, I think it's a good idea, but I think it's not only a problem of budget. It's a problem also on mindset, on the scales of transformation and how we manage complex systems and technology. And I think the solution is in a partnership between the Ministry of Defense, the different agency of procurement, and also the large system integrators. We have completely to refine, reshuffle the way of managing complex systems to create more modularity, etc. So I think the budget is very important. Of course, it's possible for the European Commission to develop specific budget or other kind of source of budget. But I think if we don't have the change of mindset, a change of managing, more transversality, like silo, perhaps change of value chain and position of some actors in the value chain, it's not possible to integrate rapidly with technology. So that's the reason why I think it's not only a problem of budget, it's problems of the rules of games for all the actors for developing project. But you're right, it's one of the big problems for all countries in the United States and in Europe, also in France also.
If I can just add a word, I think that's a great question. And probably I would just add whether it's two different logics or two different really priorities. To what extent they are connected, but they follow different logics, and to what extent they follow different priorities. Because if they follow different priorities, we have the reason why you cannot move from one to the other. And probably one solution at the European level or any level we want is to try to make sure that the priorities are aligned. And so even if the logics are different, you can bridge. No, I would probably say, but that's what was great.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, a good question. I perhaps would bring in the notion of this sense of urgency that I think is very much related to the ongoing war in Ukraine. We see a number of nations now increasing defense budgets, and not with the aim of developing new capabilities by 2035 or 2040. I think that's a mindset that we should not have anymore, but to be able to fight the war tomorrow if necessary. I hope that this will have a positive impact also on innovation that is looking at doing something quickly to be able to field capabilities tomorrow that are very needed. And I accept what Andrea Geli said about the war in Ukraine not being a perfect example of innovative solutions, even though we see them as well. But I think that still it should probably drive some capability development also in our own countries. In many countries, we still are focused on the wars of yesterday in Afghanistan, Iraq, in Africa and elsewhere. And in order to transform these existing legacy capabilities, I would say, to what is needed to counter resurgent Russia, there may have to be some steps taken which are not within our existing DNA, especially if we are used to having this mindset of a 10-year planning perspective. So quick solutions, which may be simple, I think are very welcome. I'm not sure whether the EDF or any bringing in the commission here is a good step. Could be. I'm not sure. I'm just not commenting on it.
Thank you. We will take the question from the audience, but just have a comment for the persons who are connected online. There was a question on venture capitals, but we lost the connection, so your questions disappeared. So if you could just maybe re-ask the question in the chat, and then we will try to answer it. Thank you.
Do you think the war in Ukraine can be an incentive for more European Union collaboration in this domain?
Perhaps I'm not sure. I'm not sure because there are too many challenges and issues at Nato level, European level, etc. And we have to decide very quickly about new capabilities. Perhaps we are without thinking about the future, but on the short-term perspective. And it's important, we have to think about short-term perspective, but I'm not sure that for developing critical capability, it will increase European collaboration. That's the reason why I said we have to be pragmatic and try to develop more flexible way to thinking about critical capabilities in short-term perspective and long-term perspective. And sometimes when we are strong, we have to develop collective strategy at the European level. And when we are not so strong, we have to think differently. Not to think about ideology or politics, think pragmatically for developing a solution. But I'm not sure that this crisis will increase rapidly European collaboration.
Well, what I can just say is that if we look historically, the big wave of cooperation on our weapons program in Europe occurred after the end of the Cold War, where budgets were slashed. So now that many countries are increasing, the risk is that the incentives for cooperation may be maybe smaller, would be probably bad because of to avoid this known duplication and so forth, and also for ensuring coordination. Definitely, if we think how many tanks Russia lost, it's basically lost all the tanks that a country like France currently deploys. No, so to what extent, again, we need really. So there are two questions. One is how much modernization and increase of force structure is necessary, and the other, how much weaker will Russia be? Because if they keep losing so much equipment, it's possible that in the medium term, they're not a threat any longer. Hopefully, I hope that the war stops as soon as possible, but that's also a consideration to be made.
Marcin, you would like to answer?
Yes, if I just jump in, because linking what the Renault questions on the budget for bridging the EDF in the R&D programs and procurement, and the question on more cooperation. I mean, what we have seen, and for me is a kind of let's say a reason to think that a sea change can follow as regards European approach and to defense cooperation and the European thinking about the EU level of ambition in defense, is the decision on the European Peace Facility. And the first decision, the second decision, boosting the budget for providing arms for Ukraine. So I mean, we have when you hear different people, and many of you perhaps also discussed this when the decision was made, that this is another breakthrough, so to say. This is another event in which kind of has a potential at least to reshape the thinking about what the EU can do in defense. So, you know, thinking theoretically for now, but theory can become practice very soon. More EU role in supporting member states in acquiring capabilities is not something unimaginable today, and definitely not tomorrow, when Russia is not necessarily has to be less of a threat, because it may be actually bigger of a threat. I mean, it's not the topic of our meeting today, but even with the losses they have and the performance they have displayed in the battlefield, the threat does not disappear. It just changes, and it may even come around 2030 with double the force if we allow Russia to rebuild militarily and continue its policy lines which led to its invasion in Ukraine. So I think that actually we can, so to say, take our lessons learned from the Russian invasion in Ukraine and from our decision on the EPF to see if there are ways of the EU not only helping build resilience of the member states, which Compass is full of, but also help with the cooperation on actually getting capabilities needed and getting them quickly. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the good question. I believe that most of the additional money that is allocated for defense will probably be spent on areas where it is possible to fill existing gaps and shortfalls very quickly, such as ammunition and so on, which is not probably going to drive innovation very much. On the other hand, I would not exclude the possibility, and I think it's even likely that that nations will now start looking at defense and perhaps security also in a broader term in a new way. It is not a secret really that until very recently a number of nations, and I'm more familiar with the NATO defense planning than on the EU side, until recently some nations rejected capability targets in NATO only because they were seemed as something that was unnecessary and they were unable to afford. If they now get the money, they are back into the market, there is a requirement, they have the money. So there are more players now, I hope in the future, who are looking at developing new capabilities, which may not only be there for the short term, but in the midterm and the long term. So I think it could work both ways, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Before taking this question, so we have 3 questions on the chat from Simona Soare. I will pick up one. So the last one, how do the 4 nations think about expanding venture capital funding in supporting especially early stage innovation in startups?
Oh, it's yes, big issue. I think it's depends how we identify the markets and the civilian and military market for startups. It could be associated to dual use technologies in related markets to defense systems. So in defense, aeronautics, civilian and military aeronautics, etc. And sometimes you can develop diversification for startups in different markets, not only in aeronautics, civilian or military and others. And depending of how it's possible to develop opportunities for startups on strategic projects, it's possible to finance this project differently. And so the role of funding capital depends on the way of managing the opportunity for startups and the potential of markets, civilian and military markets, and what kind of military markets and what kind of civilian markets. So there are no one solution and one possibility. It depends on how it's possible to identify the opportunity on markets. But I think it's perhaps easier when it's possible for the startups to identify related market to military markets, but not only in aeronautics, because it's offer various way to valorize the technologies and the assets of a startup. So it's easier to find budget and finding venture capital, etc. When it's only for defense and aeronautics markets, it's possible to develop funding capital, but it's more tricky, I think, in the long-term perspective.
So I would just add that venture capital, first you need to have people funding startups, and so you need talent. And what is important is that this talent does not go to other countries or other continents, because find it easier to create startups. And that's the first issue. Otherwise, you already have a disadvantage. The second is that the very venture capital, what's the value added is all the experience and expertise they've built. So you need a system which is very rapid. I mean, ultimately, Hunters in Norway and so forth, what's their really, how they can succeed is because they've seen so many failure and so many have vetted. So you need a system which is dynamic, and this is bigger than simple funding and simple country and so forth. You need obviously the ecosystem allowing the companies to scale, and finally the market. Because again, if we can put all the money we want on the venture capital, but if there's no case for that anybody will buy this product, and this relates to the question about innovation logic and procurement logic, well, who is gonna, I mean, if we put state money, we're going to lose them. If we make private money, people are going to ask for subsidies. And so it's so there's probably some reform, some coordination to be fixed.
Yeah, I would say that at least in Estonia, the problem is that there is not enough demand for new technologies. There is more supply than demand. There is a relatively large number of small companies with good ideas. The government today has mechanisms how to support these companies with grants. But I think that the challenge in the near term will be again to somehow bring these new technologies and new knowledge and innovation into the defense forces to boost the demand side rather than the supply side. Thank you.
Thank you. Jan-Joel Andersson from EDA, and the chief executive had to leave here, but wanted to follow up on a few points here regarding what do we do now, right? So the idea also being able to keep two things in the head at the same time, right? Yes, everything changed. We need to refill quickly, the sense of urgency. Clearly, a lot of member states need to refill their supply stores very quickly. There's an industry issue there on how much they can. But at the same time, right, I mean, you need to keep on innovating also for 2035 and 40, because after all, the innovations today or those technologies used today to defeat Russian armor, the strike down missile technology, anti-tank missile technology were developed in the 70s, fielded in the 1980s in Sweden, for example, by Saab and other technology companies that now delivers. The MRTT tanker transport fleet that are fulfilling needs both in evacuation of Afghanistan, but also now were started 10 years ago, right? So you don't know. But the thing is that we do have now a system in place, developed largely since 2016, the EU Global Strategy, the EU Defense Initiatives on prioritization, on cooperation, on research technology, and Jean-Francois may mention that later, but the overarching strategic research agenda, where the EU member states largely are in agreement on what technologies and needs to be developed. And these things are in place. But the thing is that all these things were developed in a time where there were no money, right? Now we have money, or will have a lot of money. So countries and member states clearly will do some things on their own. Some things they will do bilaterally. Some things they will do perhaps transatlantically. But some things should and will be done at the European level. And for those things, we do have a lot of things in place, and we should now use them since we now also have the money. But my question to the panel then is from a national perspective, so innovation system, is that can you then have you the capacity to do it both at the national level, at the transatlantic level, and at the EU level? Or will the lack of people, both in the procurement organizations, but also in the innovation side, so to say, able to work at these three levels, or will we simply end up doing the easiest thing and disintegrate again to national programs? And this is my concern. So this will have to come from both a political direction, but also from think tank sides and feeding that debate, but also from industry seeing the opportunities for it. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Who would like to answer it first?
Everybody looks at me. No, I think that's a very good point, and it's difficult to add much with only one caveat, which is if I understand correctly, your question was about that the national solution may be bad, or there was the. Being able to do all three. Oh yeah, okay.
And if you have enough human resources to do that.
Yes, no, well, I guess for many countries, and not only those we are discussing here, probably that's going to be a challenge, and a bit of political economy suggests that the optimal equilibrium may be suboptimal, or the equilibrium will be reached, will be suboptimal for different political consideration. I don't know the future, but that's possible. And I think it's a good point, but actually probably the question would be to you, how to avoid these outcomes. At least I don't have the answer.
Yes, I think you're right. The problem is about also competencies and how it's possible to develop today all the capacity for the short term, but the long term perspective. For me, it's one of the main points. It's similarity with security of the supply chain. We need to think ecosystems. And sometimes the ecosystems means that at the international, national, international, European level, we have the competencies required for developing or for thinking about the future. Sometimes not. And sometimes we have gap or some problems about human resources. But for identifying the strengths and weaknesses for each domain in terms of competencies, finding, etc., we have to think about ecosystems, how it's possible to develop collective strategies for specific domains, where are the key capabilities, etc., etc. So we need to think about, we have to think pragmatically. We have to think that sometimes we have the competencies in France, in Europe, etc. So we have to go faster on this point and to develop critical capacity for future. But sometimes we have not. So we have to develop new way to thinking about collaboration, about new partnership in Europe or in Nato, etc., etc., especially for capabilities and competencies. And for me, it's very difficult today to think about it correctly because we are completely closed and thinking about defense industrial base. So we think that we have all the elements inside the defense industrial base. It's not true. But for thinking differently, we have to accept that some critical technologies like 5G are outside the defense industrial base, and we have to think about it. and how it's possible to develop specific new original collaboration at the Nato level, European level, depending on the cases. And for accepting that, we need to think differently about security of supply chain. We need to accept that we have a lot of strengths at specific domain, but we are lacking of some competencies in other domains, and how it's possible to change the way of collaborating. But for me, it's a change of mindset, and it's perhaps a more difficult point for all the countries.
Thank you for a very good question. I will pick up on the human resources aspect on this, and I think it is a bottleneck, and it will be a bottleneck. First, if we talk about military competences and military knowledge, in my country, we don't have many dedicated military officers or NCOs that are devoted full-time on procurement or innovation. We usually bring in people on a temporary basis to get involved into specific projects and programs. If we now see that the operational requirements and also the training requirements increase in quite many nations, we see in some nations where the whole force structure is blown up with 30% and 50% and even more, it is obvious that there will be a shortfall of military knowledge, and that may have an impact also on innovation. That's the military aspect. The civilian aspect, I think that there is a bottleneck there as well. It is in many terms easier to address this by actually employing people who have been involved in innovation in other areas. But are politicians interested in increasing the number of bureaucrats? I'm not sure of that either. So I think it's a matter of explaining to politicians that if you increase the defense budget by so many percentage, you also need to bring in more people who are skilled and able to manage this funding, so that you will get the output that they're looking for.
Marcin?
I mean, that's a very good question again on the need to innovate, because I don't dispute it. I mean, definitely the technologies of tomorrow are being developed now. This is the general truth of this industry. From the perspective of Poland, I think that there is, I mean, can we embrace it? I mean, there is an increasing number of people in the industry, in the expert domain, but apparently also in the government, where we can reach from the statements that who know that the only way forward to keep the competitiveness of the national DTIB is to innovate, and that with certain technology areas, the European tools are the way to do it. However, we're not speaking, we cannot, with the exception of the MGCS, which was a former Polish goal to have the MGCS as a PESCO project and to have Polish participation in MGCS. That was discussed openly many times. With this exception, Polish participation in PESCO and EDF to date has been limited to smaller technology, let's say, pieces. Component subsystems may be a result of that projects. But in my opinion, Poland, which has never participated in a proper big European armaments program of the 1990s, kind like A400M, for instance, or the Typhoon, the only way to build the innovation is to embrace the European tools as a response to at least certain technology areas. As Valerie was saying, being pragmatic, knowing what can be developed or actually acquired off the shelf, what needs to be in fact American system because of lack of plausible alternatives, thinking of F-35 for instance, pragmatically enabling innovation in the national industry, even on the expense of duplications, because this is also an interest to have some technology competence in certain areas, and using European tools in some other technology areas where the cooperation will be the most cost-effective option. So I would not respond that are we capable of doing that. I think that saying these three assumptions, which I've just think about these three assumptions which I've just made, we have to follow this kind of approach, because focusing on any of the three only will not bring expected results. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcin. I think we will stop here because it's 10:55. So I'm sorry, Donnera, for the two questions we haven't answered on the chat. Maybe you can ask them later, but we have to respect the timeline. Thank you very much to our four panelists, and thank you to all of you, to the audience, for your great question. And it was a pleasure to moderate this roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We are about to start, if it's okay, yes, the second panel.
The one you had.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here today, for pursuing this discussion about defense innovation. Well, innovation, it has been said during the first panel, is not always about timing, but a lot is about timing. And that's true when it comes to defense innovation versus, I mean, classical armament program. And this is especially true in another context today, within the context of the Ukrainian war. And as it has been recalled by Chief Executive Ceci sooner today, this infamous Russian invasion has been a clear trigger to strengthen European defense, or defense in Europe at least. And defense budget, especially investment ones, are to increase substantially in the months, let's hope in the years to come. But this context can be a double-edged sword for the European defense cooperation, especially when it comes to innovation. These increases are, for now at least, short-term oriented, while cooperation is complex by nature and innovation is, let's say, riskier than off-the-shelf procurement. And also because innovation, even though it is about rapid adoption of new technologies, requires a more long-term approach, a more long-term vision. So clearly at European level, and that's something that emerged clearly during the first panel, we will need to strike a balance between short-term investment and long-term vision and long-term investment. This is not the heart of the discussion of this panel, but this is the background against which we will have to hold this discussion on how we can make, I mean, European cooperation possible in the month and in the years to come. And it's especially important because at the High Representative recalled it last December, innovation is at the very heart of the current restructuring of the international security environment. To quote him, either we invest a lot on defense innovation or we will become defense irrelevant. Given the scope and the breadth of the challenge ahead, Europeans need to much more engage in cooperation when it comes to innovation. A lot is going on at the EU level. This will be, I mean, one of the key topics of this discussion, with at least two massive and complementary initiatives to boost cooperation on defense innovation: the European Defense Innovation Hub within the agency and the European Defense Innovation Scheme from the European Commission. And I think nothing, of course, about the European Defense Fund. So the landscape would clearly not be complete without invoking NATO initiatives, Diana, the NATO Innovation Fund, at least, which add a layer of cooperation and probably will need to be articulated in a way or in another with the EU efforts. So this is the focus of this panel. What can we do together? What should we aim at? And under which condition can we successfully achieve these goals? And to address this question, I have the chance to host representatives from some of the main players of European defense innovation. So first, Frans Kleher, the Business Director International at TNO, the Netherlands Organization for Applied Scientific Research. Wolfgang Koch, the chief scientist at Fraunhofer Institute, and who is the spokesperson for the network of researcher on defense issue within the Fraunhofer Institute. Mr. Stéphane Moinard, head of International Cooperation Department at the French Defense Innovation Agency. Mr. Krastio Preslavski, Deputy Head of Unit of the EDF Implementation Unit within the European Commission, DG Défi, and last but not least, Director Jean-François Ripoche. So you're the Director for Research, Technology, and Innovation within the European Defense Agency. So let's open the discussion with a quick question. What can we expect realistically from the EU level when it comes to cooperation on defense innovation? And I would like first to turn to Stéphane Moinard. We know that France is very willing on European defense cooperation, but what potentials seen from France have the EU to contribute effectively to European efforts to innovate in the field of defense?
Thank you, Edouard. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to speak in front of you. And first, I wish to remind something which is obvious, but not always. We are here to ease the work of our armed forces. They are fighting today smart opponents who get smarter every day. And of course, now our priority is to detect and grab innovative solutions to enhance their capacity, save their lives. But we also continue to perform science and technology, because in the Defense Innovation Agency, we are doing both science and technology and innovation. Most of the nations are doing S&T, which is in fact, in France, we call it some planned innovation. And some countries are doing more or less the opportunity innovation, which generally needs to detect solutions that were designed by people who have no link with the defense world. The difference of means that nations can allocate to these missions can be fixed with a European approach. And the Commission, thank you, started last year by publishing the Synergy Action Plan. It has announced the basis of the Defense Pact that was published last month. And in fact, I like this share of responsibilities because what I see is the Commission will show the directions, put the tools in place, and the EDA can feed the loop with projects. With this future Defense Innovation Scheme and Defense Innovation Hub, Commission and EDA will work together with member states to identify projects of interest and promising solutions for military problems. So it will be based on a large support to innovation by the Commission, including funding and the programs for defense technology through the EDF and for dual use technologies through Horizon Europe and the EIC. If you allow me, I would open a parenthesis for the funds. Many countries and many structures are putting in place innovation funds. So did we in France for the Defense Innovation Investment Fund last year, in order to support our promising dual use companies. And I see with a lot of interest, but Krastio will speak more precisely about this, the interest of putting in place of a Cassini Defense Investment Fund very soon. So the stage after will hopefully be the organization of challenges by the EDA, where some concerns might be addressed directly on one dedicated topic between startup and member states in order to identify the interest to make a project around the beginning of a solution. And I will close the loop by recalling that this approach has to be user-centered. And this is why nations must contribute to the reflection and not leave the Commission and the EDA work without help. And our European Defense Innovation Network will surely be an important actor for providing this such support? Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Moinard, for this first reply and very interesting way to set the landscape, especially on this network of European Defense Innovation Agency. I will now turn to Germany and to Mr. Kohr. From a Germany point of view, what is expected from cooperation when it comes to defense innovation, and specifically what is expected from these recent EU initiatives in this field?
I cannot speak so much from a German point of view in general. So it's a Fraunhofer point of view and a point of view from a technician. I'm an engineer. It's an engineering point of view. If you talk about expectations and potentials of future defense research, defense innovation, we have to learn the lessons from what we are observing in the Ukraine. There is a difference between what we call in Germany Kampfkraft, ability to fight, and Gefechtswert, value on the battleground. There is a difference. Kampfkraft, ability to fight, covers all the quantitative means of fighting, numbers of tanks and whatever. The Gefechtswert implies also humane dimensions. So people who are citizens in uniform, who know where to fight, that citizens who have a reason to fight. And this is exactly what in the beginning of the German Bundeswehr was formulated by people like General von Baudissin. It makes a difference if there is an army made of citizens, or if there is an army more made of mercenaries. I believe this has, I think, implications of what we are doing on a technological level. So far, we believed much in the superiority of modern digitalization, of everything that is quantitative. I think that there's a process going on in thinking that digitalization has to be anthropocentric. So the human being, the soldier, has to be in the center of modern technology. So with these big opening remarks, I would like to stress that we should look at the future combat air system as a relatively mature example of a French, Spanish, and German collaboration. And I think we can learn a lot from what is going on at FCAS. I won't talk about political issues involved in FCAS, but I would like to talk about FCAS as a digitalization program. And what is the digitalization in defense? It has 7 pillars, I believe. It is always necessary to be as simple as possible, but not simpler. So 7 pillars, and we have to take into account all 7 pillars. The first pillar is the world of algorithms. Modern digitalization in defense lives of certain algorithms. It's a whole world of mathematics. It's not just a particular type of algorithms, such as deep learning or machine learning, neural networks. It is the full variety of applied mathematics which comes into play. There's a second pillar, which is data in a triple respect. We need data to train algorithms. We need data to test and certify algorithms, and we need data, of course, to evaluate them, to receive a situation picture. Then there is an aspect which I would like to call the art of programming, which is often underestimated. Understanding an algorithm is somehow possible if you have enough time and willingness to understand an algorithm. But to bring an algorithm or algorithms to life, so to say, requires some sort of art. Programming is an art, maybe a craft. And this means that we need perhaps also to consider smaller units, conspirative units of engineers and programmers who exactly know what they are doing. They are the Mozarts and the Beethovens of programming. And they are necessary for realizing modern defense systems. And this implies that we have to look at the smaller entities, startup companies, something like that, who will become important players by the side of the established big players. And then we have computational power. Of course, in a system like FCAS, or in a system like main ground combat system, or in naval systems above water, underwater, we will have computing at the edge. This is one aspect, but there's another aspect to be taken into account, which is the potential of quantum computing. There is the universal quantum computer, which is perhaps something in the far future, but there are already quantum processing kernels, which may be part of hybrid computing structures, which solve certain problems in defense digitalization very quickly, extremely quickly, in order to produce situation pictures. And who first has a valid situation picture is able to act first. That's very important. So don't forget quantum computing. Of course, there are also quantum sensors. I do not so much believe in quantum radar, but there are quantum sensors for navigation. If you consider unmanned vehicles maneuvering in a challenging GNSS denied environment, these quantum sensors may become important. Many things. There's another aspect, anthropocentrism. I mentioned this in the beginning. The human being has to be in the center. This comprises the ergonomic aspect. Human beings must be able to deal with modern defense systems in a way that they are masters and the machines are the slaves, so to say. But this also implies the ethical and legal dimension. We have to design defense systems in such a way that their responsible use is not only enabled, but facilitated in order to use such systems in an appropriate sense. Then we have a sixth column, which is how to bring this into realization. And this addresses the collaboration between those who have requirements, those who are doing research, and those who are realizing it, the procurement agencies and the industry, of course. And finally, considering a system such as FCAS, the underlying structure of FCAS is not visible. It's not what makes things fly or what makes things see or makes things make things effective. It's the hidden substructure of a combat cloud. And this is relevant for FCAS, this is relevant for main ground combat systems and naval systems. And this informational backbone is something that is relevant for multi-domain and perhaps all domain operations and command and control. I think I should stop now.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was perfect. And that was a clear depiction of the landscape, I would say, of the various areas where cooperation is necessary, where it's certainly difficult. And we can certainly grab the, let's say, the breadth of the challenge which is ahead. Let's now turn to Franz Klier from TNO with the same question, and maybe recentered on the EU and the European cooperation aspect. What is, according to you, Mr. Klier, the added value of the EU when it comes to well, defense innovation and defense innovation cooperation?
Thank you for inviting me and giving me the word today. Just to be clear, before I start talking about the EU, I'll explain what I mean when talking about the EU. For me, EU is on one hand the Commission and the DGs and the bureaucracy that goes with it. That's one part. The other part is the European Defence Agency. For me, they're both EU. So they play a distinct different role, although there is also a lot of overlap between the two. When I talk about the Commission, I divide the whole process in 3 steps: the preparation phase, the execution, and the actual procurement. And each of these phases has its own peculiarities, difficult word, that require attention. In the preparation phase, the Commission plays an important role in selecting the right topics. I know this is done through the nations. They dictate, or at least they come with the ideas on the table with what should be in the program of EDF and other activities. But the Commission can play a critical role by asking, are you sure? Do you really want this? It also could put a bit more focus on the long-term perspectives. Often this is forgotten because our national planning systems also only have a view of, let's say, 4 to 8 years and not 30, 40 years. We need to think about the successor of the F-35 in the Netherlands instead of talking about FCAS, just as an example. So selection of the right topics, including the synergy with civil ongoing activities that overlap with defense, especially in the area of security. Another effort, which is important for the success at the end, is to push nations slowly to a synchronized way of planning. Because we see that the planning of the national plans that we have in the Ministry of Defense are located in different years throughout the coming 10, 20 years. And there must be some sort of synchronization that if we want to buy a new frigate or aircraft, there are similar nations who are looking for an aircraft or a tank or whatever the capability is at about that same time. Synchronize these things. That is important because that adds power to selection of the topics. And I'm not saying that the whole of Europe should change from one tank to another at the same time. We might divide that in 3 steps. So and every 1/3 of the capability in aircraft, tanks, ships is the most modern one, then a medium modern one, and let's say an old one, if you want to use that word. These phases. So that is in the preparation phase. When it comes to the execution phase, I would suggest to put more emphasis on things that hinder participation in EDF and cooperation in general. You would be surprised how many paperwork you have to push away before you're getting an export license to do research in EDF, which is kind of stupid to me because we are selecting people who are lawful abiding citizens of Europe. So why should I be bothered by a national rule about export license during the EDF research and development phase? So have a look at it and try to solve that on behalf of the nations, together with the nations. How do we deal with classified information? Exchange of classified information during the execution of a project. This might be done by procuring crypto capabilities that can be borrowed from the Commission through the years that you run a project. I've done the same in NATO many years ago. And last but not least, a small thing, release draft documents. The Commission is at the moment very anxious to keep everything closed, even threatening by throwing out nations that share information. I can tell you, those capacities, entities that are able to have an office in Brussels will have copies of the work programs and these kinds of papers. Why is it important? Because those who do not have an office in Brussels, and there are many, they have no clue what's happening. And missing that doesn't allow them to prepare for what is coming. So you don't play an equal playing field in that. So the big industries, the big RTOs, they have an office, they will grow. They will get somewhere a stack of papers when they drink a beer at Place d'Italie. But the smaller ones not, and we need to level that playing field. Then when it comes to the procurement phase, export control again becomes an issue. What do we do with the aircraft or ship or tank that is put together by with components from different nations. Do we take out that radar because it's built by the Netherlands, and the Netherlands doesn't want to export outside the EU to another country that we don't like? There are, let's say, flexible and less flexible nations within the European Union. So we have to deal with that. When it comes to EDA, I would say very strongly advise, don't replicate what is done already in nations. The biggest example I can give is tech watches. Don't do your own tech watch, make use of technology watches that is done by almost every country in Europe, and bring the countries together and create a synergy between these things. I think the EDA is perfect suited to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kleer. After this short tour of Europe, if I can put it that way, I would now turn to, well, the EU institution to see how these different approaches can be reconciled. And first, I would like to give the floor to the agency and to Jean-François Ripoche. How can we make sense and how can we create value for armed forces from these, let's say, differences of approach?
Thank you. And first of all, thank you for inviting us to speak in this panel. About these expectations, I think our goal is to enhance the return on investment for our member states with maybe a little increase of human resources involved, but really limited. So I think what we can bring on the table is more awareness using the existing working groups, such as CAPTEX, for example, the Capability Technology Working Group in EDA. Then we can share the awareness. Innovation is also about, it's been spoke a lot about it already in the first panel, is a lot about openness, knowing what's happening there. And I think if there's a good company in any member states with a good solution for their home soldiers, why shouldn't the other ones be at least aware that it exists? They might not select it, but they should know that it exists. So in this way, we will avoid duplication and enrich the, the pool of solution. As I agree that we should not duplicate what is done in the member states, at the same time, there is also a drive that there is a place where, for example, monitoring EDTs, getting together emerging disruptive technology, getting together a common landscape, agreed and shared landscape for everyone, so that then we can know where to put the effort and decide where to put the effort together is also needed. So this awareness about what's happening in the world in terms of innovation in Europe, in terms of innovation and what is needed in terms of emerging disruptive technology. And then I think in EDA, what one of our assets is that in terms of improving the user military involvement is that we are by nature a place where we are linking the development of technology and the possible defense application, which in Europe is really what makes a difference between the defense research and innovation compared to science or civilian research. It's not at all the same in US and China, for example, where the entanglement or even the role of DoD is really to support also universities. And then what else can we bring on the table? Synergies, it has been mentioned. We have already a good experience of collaboration with the EU institution at large, with the European Investment Bank, with the DG Energy, for example, when it comes to bridging defense and energy sectors. We think these models can also be enhanced and adapted to defense innovation. And the goal is to do more and faster, of course. So more prototypes, more demonstrators, so that the user can see the added value, especially in the digital world, because it's less capital intensive. And we have many non-traditional players that maybe can bring their skills to the table. And then, yeah, more projects, so more prizes, more opportunities for everyone to join the effort. And then maybe I'll stop here for now.
Okay, thank you for these introductory remarks and which probably laid the grounds for what will be the European Defence Innovation Hub within the agency and what are going to be, let's say, its main foci, probably. So let's now turn to Krasio Preslatsky and maybe on the European Defence Innovation Scheme, because this is the second major initiative of the EU that has been announced quite recently. How can this initiative address, well, those different national difference in approaches to defense innovation, and how can it be, let's say, complementary to, well, the agency hub, for instance, and in particular?
Many thanks, Eduardo, also for the invitation to be with you today. It's always difficult to be the fifth speaker on a particular subject, so I'll just mention a few elements in addition to what the previous speakers mentioned. And I'll start with a bit of a provocation. Just a few years ago, if I had to make a presentation of European Union support for defense industry research and innovation, I would have had an empty slide. When I started working with European research and innovation 12 years ago, this was the last years of FP7, then Horizon 2020, then Horizon Europe, defense was a taboo word. In program committees where member states were discussing things, every time you hear defense, support for defense industries, research and innovation, this was just a bad word. That's the reality. This was discussed in the context of member states. This was discussed in the context of NATO, maybe, but this was not something that the European Commission or the European Union had to touch. So this is really a very, very important starting point for all of us to understand. And also culturally, this is a very important, also inside the Commission. Now, where are we a few years later? We already have the European Defence Fund, which is something under the remit of my unit. In just a few years, we managed to have a dedicated fund with a budget of more or less 1 billion per year. So this puts us already at the stage of a major member state level of funding for research and innovation in the area of defense. It's a really a game changer compared to the precursor programs in terms of funding. It is already, the reason why I mentioned it, of course, that it is already available. And of course, there are calls that are coming in the next months. You know that we have, of course, open SME calls. You know that we have a bonus system for SMEs, which is addressing part of the challenge that many of the previous speakers mentioned, namely to attract also non-traditional players to the world of defense. Now, what can we do more at European level? I think there are three main areas. One is to develop processes to allow research and industry to come up with novel ideas. The second is really to attract non-traditional players, companies from the civilian sector who have never dreamed about entering the defense market, startups, SMEs, to overcome the hurdles to enter the defense industry world. And third, very importantly mentioned by many of the speakers, to foster more cooperative attitudes of the member states. And this is where we come to the EU Defense Innovation Scheme mentioned by Edouard. Essentially, it will consist of measures to enhance innovation in the defense industry. This means looking at ways to enhance access to finance. This is also about examining opportunities for the EDF to boost innovation. And this is about establishing the so-called defense innovation incubator, where the logic is that we'll be looking at ideas that originate in the context of civilian R&D programs like Horizon Europe, for example, which can present high added value for defense applications. And then we also have the idea about Cassini for Defense, which will be the new instrument for investment support with services such as access to finance, business developments, and networks. And since I know I have 4 minutes, I'll stop here with the sentence that we have seen a revolutionary change for a public administration like the European Commission, and it's the same in all member states. The changes we have seen in the area of defense, even the start of the European Defense Fund, has happened with the speed of light. I know this is not enough. I know this is just the beginning, but there are also many exciting moments ahead of us. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you both to Jean-François Ripoche and to Kristio Preslavski to offer us a first insight of what could be these two major initiatives that have been recently announced, but needs to be, let's say, put into music. So it was very useful to have this first presentation. Before I open the discussion to the audience, I would like to have a second round of questions. So, well, we all have at European level different experience and different expectations regarding defense innovations, but we all have also different, let's say, experiences regarding cooperation. So, well, this is nice and key to have expectations, objective to drive defense innovation, cooperations, but, well, once again, cooperation, it's tricky. I mean, practically by nature, it's difficult. It's not a long, quiet river. So, although necessary, cooperation is generally harder than any national program. This is a commonplace to say, but it needs to be acknowledged and reminded each time to understand what is ahead of us. And so maybe I would like to precisely focus the second round of question on this question of how do we, well, succeed in cooperating together? How do we make this cooperation successful, and what kind of obstacles, what kind of obstacles do we have to overcome? So if you allow me, I will, like the first station, do a kind of a little tour of Europe and begin with Germany this time and with Wolfgang Kohr. According to you, what are the main issues which are triggered by cooperation, and how can we address them effectively, and especially in the EU context?
Perhaps we should be guided by the question of what actually is innovation. Innovation has several levels, several prerequisites. First of all, innovation is innovative research. And there is a very active research community, defense research community in Germany, in all countries. And this research community meets without any bureaucracy. We are meeting at the international conferences, and we are at a scientific level in constant exchange. There is a huge potential and enthusiastic researchers. And research is good only if it's happy research. It's a creative process. This is often seen with some frowning, but that's important, really important. It's creative. It's creative. But good research is not yet innovation. Research needs guidance. Happy research needs strong guidance, perhaps. A guidance that leads to good products with an added value to the soldiers. But good products are also not yet innovation. In addition to a good product, we need, of course, concepts, CONOPS. It has to be embedded in the military environment. There's continuous research where the CONOPS are not so much changed, and there's disruptive innovation, perhaps not yet innovation, but disruptive if we need new CONOPS. But to have in effect a real innovation, we need to have also societal and cultural acceptance. This is very important and not to be underestimated, perhaps especially in a German perspective. In Germany, we had now a Zeitenwende. Something has changed. But before the Zeitenwende, the question at the societal level, whether a liberal democracy actually needs to be forceful and needs to be able to defend itself, is at a societal level not clearly answered. It was not clearly answered. This may change now. So societal acceptance is important. And this has the implication that modern defense technology needs to be responsible. That's very important. And so this is, I think, these are important conditions. And to be a little bit more focused, I would like to say there are 3 R's that are very important. 3 R's that form a triangle. Of course, we have the military requirements, the first R. And we have the research. And it's very important that the people who are writing down requirements have a good personal and direct contact with people who are aware of what is possible at the research level. Sometimes the military people require too much, sometimes they require too less, sometimes they require way too detailed. That's very important, and that's the reason why some bigger research procurement programs fail, because the requirements are bad. So R, and there's the realization R also. Realization consisting of procurement and of industry, of course. In Germany, we have a special situation because of our constitution that it's not so, they have a divide between those who are requiring and those who are realizing. This is fixed in our constitution. And actually, there seems to be a brick wall between the soldiers and the procurement people. That's very bad for innovation, extremely bad for innovation. And what I also hear always is that there is a huge bureaucracy, European competition law, and I do not know what. Sometimes I have the impression that there is malware, but there may be also mal-laws that seem to be implemented to stop innovation. But that's not very seriously meant. I believe a very important driver of innovation is if this triple R, this triangle with the triple R's, is a beating heart. And if the links between the different R's are superconducting, and the people should know each other even personally. So this triple R is a very important condition for defense innovation.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kor. I will now turn to Stéphane Moinard, and I will ask you maybe, well, whether you agree or if you see maybe all the factors that need to be taken into considerations to, well, have effective, productive, useful defense innovation cooperation.
Thank you. I would say both. I agree, and I see other factors too. I would add some factors by two words, words that I appreciate a lot. The first one is connection, and the second one is synergy. The connection is the interest of connecting is to, because in this room, in our collective forums, we see there is a network, a European Defense of Innovation network. It already exists, but it needs to be more formal, more regularly merged and associated. So Jean-François, when the hub opens, I guess we'll be applying for some meeting in this hub. And the second one is synergy. I like this word because it's the opposite of wasting. And our duty is to be efficient in the way we spend the money we have. And one critical wasting is to try to invent what already exists. And this is why I see what the Commission has already done, which is the Horizon Europe and the European Innovation Council. This program is funded about 90 billion euros for the current MFP. So there are special topics that are of immediate interest for us. There are space, there is energy, there is there are security. Sorry, I was forgetting what I deal with it every day, but I have forgotten the word. It would be a crime to try to make some projects that maybe are already imagined in the Horizon Europe. So I guess what is important is to connect Horizon Europe and the EIC and the DEFIS and EDA couple in order to identify a list of projects that have already been thought of in this research forum, and identify which of them may be of interest for a more typical defense use, in order to identify maybe some some following in the EDF or in something else, but is there an opportunity for pursuing some defense suit, defense following for a Horizon Europe topic? And so this is not expensive, because doing this work is just a matter of human resource, maybe 2 or 3 people, I don't know, but we are already able to do so. And I hope that we will find the key to open that remaining door. So my personal concern is to just take benefit of what already exists in our landscape.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's now go to the Netherlands with Mr. Cleher. And the Netherlands too has a long-standing experience, tradition of cooperation. I would be tempted to ask you the same question. Do you see other factors that needs to be, well, taken into consideration, that needs to be factored in to make cooperation successful?
Well, there are a lot of them, and many of them were mentioned by the other speakers already, so I won't repeat them. But cooperation, because I'm Dutch, saves money. That's the true thing. It saves money, but it also enriches solutions, because you talk with and work together with people who have a different view on things, and that enriches the solutions. You're biased by default. But an very underestimated additional thing is it builds trust. And that might seem not important, but when you have to fight, you want to rely on the neighbor next to you. And that might be somebody from another country. And building this trust has shown over and over again how worthwhile, how fruitful that is, and has a lot of added value. And because of that, cooperation is not new. I'm a bit surprised by a lot of the discussions ongoing at the moment, where it looks like people are thinking about cooperation as it has never existed. And now we have EDF, and suddenly, the whole world is cooperating with each other. We've been doing cooperation for a very long time. And I can tell you, with my background as an Air Force officer, we learned to cooperate when we came back from the first Gulf War and found out that the 3 Patriot units from Germany, Netherlands, and the US were not able to communicate with each other. So we said, let's work together and fix this, technology-wise, but also by getting acquainted with people and procedures and tactics and all that. That is the basis for Joint Project Optic Windmill, one of the biggest air and missile defense exercises that's still around and organized by the Netherlands every 2 years. We talked about the synergy between defense and security, and that is something that is in its first phase, I would say. We know where we want to go to, more or less, with defense, requiring a top-down approach where you say, these are the goals that I want to achieve in 10, 30, 40 years ahead, but also using the existing cooperation, existing programs that we have, existing experiences, which is a kind of bottom-up approach, where you say, this is what we've done in the past, and let's continue working on that. And some examples were mentioned already this morning with Ocean 2020, GOSRA, ACAMS 2, and similar programs. That could be combined maybe in the future, and that might be a role for EDA as well, in war games. Because sitting behind the desk and putting it on paper, that's one step, make the thing work. But then you have to use it and see what it really works in semi-operational conditions. And the first step could be a war game where you can play all kinds of situations. You can speed up the speed of an aircraft or a ship by just changing the code, and then it moves faster. And then you see what is the effect of that. These kind of war games and exercises can be used to mature the capabilities. And again, these war games and exercises require cooperation between all the different players. And again, coming back to what I said at the beginning, it will strengthen the cooperation, the trust, etc. We've done a recent test with the Americans where the Americans were using radar images from a Dutch frigate to launch a missile on a target they couldn't see at that point in time. So that kind of cooperation is, I would say, the future, more or less. So that comes back to exercises, wargaming, to practice. So if you are called to fight a conflict, then you know who's sitting next to you. I'll leave it with that.
Okay, thank you so much. It was very interesting, and it was, I think, very interesting to have this, let's say, landscape of, well, these preconditions to a successful cooperation. And I would like to, well, turn to representatives from EU institutions and to make them react to these, well, identified preconditions at national level, and to ask them how we can address specifically these difficulties triggered by cooperation, and how can we overcome them. And I will first turn to Krasio Preslavski from the GDFI, and I will maybe take this opportunity also to add another question, building upon a question that has been raised during the first panel. One of the main issues when it comes to innovation is to make sure that it leads to procurement and to effective capabilities. And so, I mean, this is a question that has been raised recently. I would be very interested to have also your view specifically on this issue.
Thank you very much, Edouard. I must admit, I learned a new word today, which is Zeitenwende. And it is sometimes a cliche where we say we're living a historical moment, but in this case, I think we all agree it is a Zeitenwende for European defense and for European defense innovation. And how it will go from here is not clear. I mean, just throwing money is one thing. Of course, you have the political commitment from certain countries to increase the budget. And probably using the money is, of course, challenging, difficult, etc. But this is the easy part. The complicated part is to use the money cleverly, so that at the end we do not end up with even less possibility to cooperate. I mean, all countries buying separately off-the-shelf products, etc., at the detriment of the European defense industry. So at the end, we can have even lower level of interoperability. We can have lower levels of cooperation. But if we manage to develop all these new initiatives, what I mentioned, what the colleagues from the EDA mentioned, NATO was surely mentioned in the first session, then this will be beneficial for all member states. And the TNO colleague said it in a very Dutch way, which is also a very honest way to present it. It is about making defense spending more efficient. You probably remember when President Juncker, the previous president of the European Commission, when he was the first one to really talk about European defense research and innovation cooperation, there was a very basic fact sheet with the number of major weapon systems in Europe and the US. And it was very visibly showing we have something like 180 major industry systems in Europe. In the EU member states, we have around 30 in the US. We have 17 types of main battle tanks in Europe. We have one in the US, the Abrams. Of course, it is an oversimplification of something that is very, very complicated. You know that very clearly. But this just clearly shows the huge potential of cooperation to reach more value for money, basically. And this is why, for example, the European Commission has included in the defense package some very specific actions to support the joint procurement and ownership of defense capabilities. You have clearly seen that there is a reference to make a proposal for a VAT waiver to support joint procurement and ownership of defense capabilities, which are developed in a collaborative way within the EU. There is the commitment to explore new financing solutions to facilitate member states' joint procurement of capabilities. and there is also the commitment to explore the reinforcement of the EDF bonus system for member states which are able to jointly acquire more. So this would be my quick reaction to the very valid comments by the previous colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Preslavsky. And I will now eventually turn to Mr. Ripoche with, well, the same question. How do you react to these, well, preconditions for cooperation success? And maybe to add one point more specific, I mean, within the agency, you have a lot of initiative, notably to ensure a kind of leadership to show the way. I'm thinking of the CDP, for instance. I'm thinking of the OSRA, etc., etc. How do you ensure consistency between, well, the future of this, I mean, of this European defense innovation, then this bottom-up approach with these different instruments, and to ensure that it goes in the good direction?
Okay, thank you again. It's a very wide question.
Yeah,
so first of all, I would like to mention that indeed, based on the principle that I previously stated, the work on definition of exact definition of what the hub will be is a work in progress. And also to clearly state that we are really committed to have a single European landscape with the Commission and the other EU institutions. I mean, we don't want to have an overlap, so it's really, there's so much to do. It's really sharing the work together, and we're working on this, but of course the devil is in the details. So I will ask for some patience here. Well, still conditions of success are a bit resources. You need to keep on investing on the long term. That was also a bit discussed in the first panel, but you must not forget preparation of the future. The work we are doing now is to tackle with the crisis in 10 or 15 years time that probably, unfortunately, will come. But it's not only about money. You need a bit more of human resources. And we think that putting them at EU level will make the best use of them. As condition of success, I would say it's a mix from our experience of flexibility, being light, being agile, but at the same time, once it works, stability. If it is, you know the say in, especially in the US, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And we think in our ad hoc projects and R&D projects, we have just this, okay? It took some time to fine tune it, but now the member states, the industry, they know how it works. If they don't want to play with these rules, fine. I mean, nobody's forcing them. If they want to play, at least they know the parameters of the field. And I think it's very important in innovation, because you cannot waste time discussing about IPRs. What does it mean in this contract, security issue, and so on. Otherwise, it's already too late. Then you need this ecosystem in place. And we think that within EDA, we have the fora where people can already meet. I mentioned CapTex, it's government representatives, but also industry of all kinds. And by industry, I mean the usual system integrators in defense, but also SMEs, but also research and technology organizations. And we really want to reach out to more and more people. And our goal is to augment the connection. And also, well, COVID has been an opportunity here. We have more chance to do hybrid format meetings, VTC formats, which is the burden for smaller entities. And then maybe one last point I would mention, and a plea maybe to our member states, is that the condition of success is to bring actual issues, actual operational challenges to the people we want to bring solutions. And that means if we talk, for example, about data, it's real data that we want. So do not overclassify. Maybe the temperature of an engine is not a classified information. Where it was exactly when the temperature was 200 degrees, yeah, okay, I can agree. But if you want to make progress using new technologies on predictive maintenance, AI, and so on, you need to be able to share. Otherwise, it's still national initiatives, and there will be good things coming out of it. Yeah, and I will keep it here from now. I guess there will be many questions.
I guess so. Thank you so much for this this reply. And I will now open the discussion to the audience, and I will take the question. I see one arm there. And I will ask you to introduce yourself before asking a question, please.
Merci, Edouard. I am Bertrand de Cordoue from Airbus. I was highly interested by most of the presentations, but I had a particularly keen interest for the way Wolfgang Koch presented the FCAS program as a digitalization program. I think it was very straightforward and a good way to approach something we are working on and which is relatively complex. As everybody knows, the FCAS is, as of today, a 3 nations program, France, Germany, and Spain. And it's obvious that this is a project which will draw innovation from a broader basis than just these 3 nations. And we already see that typically in the European Defence Funds are calls on technologies which might at some point feed the FCAS ambition and the FCAS project. At the same time, we all know, or at least you have heard, that today the FCAS program is facing difficulties due to industrial rivalries, which are mostly focused on the organization and the governance of the way to produce the platforms, the objects. Mainly the fighter, but not only the fighter, also the UAVs, the drones, and maybe the satellites. This is where the attention is today focused. And my question, and I would be interested to have the reaction of the panel, is whether having the way Mr. Koch approached the project through this digitalization priority axis or dimension, it would be a way to better collaborate and to overcome, or at least to help to overcome the competition between the companies and between the national industries. Because by essence, digitalization means networking, means common ground, means putting together data and so on. I don't refer to the internet model, but you understand what I mean. And therefore, my question is whether for you, for the European Defence Agency, for the European Commission and the others, approaching a big European project like FCAS through this cloud digitalization dimension would be a way to overcome the national resistance, industrial resistances.
So I don't know who wants to.
I can start.
Yeah.
I'll sidestep a bit. In our experience, where it's easy to cooperate on enablers where there is no existing solutions, so part of the obstacles can be done in cooperation, especially if there's really no other solution. And a good example was gallium nitride, where Airbus Germany and Thales France joined forces and actually created a company supported by cooperative defense R&D in EDA, so that in the end you have high power electronic components both in the Eurofighter and in the Rafale system, whereas you have 2 different systems. So that's why I said I would sidestep a bit. Then we really have in our plans to together with the member states, find out what are the conditions, for example, to share data in the defense domain, to enable all AI and digital processes to work in the future. That's also work in progress, and we can only go as far as we have people to do it, because it's not easy, as you well know, also in the private sector domain.
Thank you so much. Maybe Mr. Koch, do you want to add something?
The FCAS is a so to say an example, a paradigm where we can a lot the future innovation will happen. We have vertical structures here, companies that make things fly. We have companies that make things see. We have companies that make things communicate. We have companies that make things have kinetic effects, so to say, vertical columns, traditional vertical columns. But what is really new here in this systems of systems called FCAS, what will be new in the main ground combat system at sea, underwater, important topic, underwater, is that there in addition is a horizontal structure, which is extremely important, a structure which is the backbone for using effective algorithms, a backbone for using AI cleverly, a backbone for having knowledge about which data have already been used for training, which data should be used for retraining. And there's also, it's also easy to turn information fusion into information confusion if you don't have this horizontal backbone. This horizontal backbone, that's really something new, innovative, and very powerful. Of course, there is a potential of frictions between the vertical ones and the horizontal ones because all is on data. Thus, the companies who are producing data really want to bring their data into this horizontal structure. Because if you have the data, you know everything about the underlying sensor system, the weaknesses and the unique selling points or whatever. So I think from an organizational point of view, maybe for European Union, for innovation agencies, hubs or whatever, it will be a great challenge to bring this technology, the horizontal and vertical dimensions into a proper balance. I believe that combat cloud, or however you will call it in the end, that's really important, and it will be important for all domains, in the air, at sea, underwater, or whatever. That's really, really very, very tricky. Also important for hypersonics and whatever.
Thank you so much, Mr. Clear. I thought that you know it. So do you want to add something?
Yeah, well, it comes back to what was published a few months ago, maybe a year ago, by the Dutch Ministry of Defense, which is the Defense Vision 2035, which doesn't talk about FCAS or tanks and ships and all that. It is all about information controlled operations. And that's what you're referring to. And I'm very happy to hear that, because the capability itself is less important in that case. FCAS is also an interesting case for another very different reason. Because in the Netherlands, when we asked the Ministry of Defense about FCAS, would contribute and then whether we could be involved in the program, etc., the Ministry of Defense said, nope. We have the F-35, so we're done until 2045 or something. But there might be an economic reason to have Dutch companies and research institutes participate in FCAS, not on a large scale, but on a small scale, because there are economical reasons to have Fokker being known in this group of FCAS builders. And that opened, at least to some extent, my eyes on the role of the Ministry of Economic Affairs, because the Ministry of Defense says, okay, if there are economical reasons, fine, but that's not my main task. So you go to the Ministry of Economic Affairs. So you have at least two ministries involved in this. The second thing that is funny about the FCAS project is that I talked to people from Airbus Germany a few months ago during the Berlin Security Conference and told them about basically the same story I'm telling you now. We're not interested, etc. But I said, we do have a capability that might be of interest to you, because we run a simulation tool in TNO, Desdemona, which can pull up about 4 Gs and have 6 degrees of freedom for maneuvering. And that could be a great opportunity, a great tool to test cockpit layouts, all that. These are all small things, but it shows that having capabilities, test capabilities in your country could be valuable. And collecting these unique capabilities around Europe might save also a lot of money, especially in big programs like FCAS.
Thank you so much, Mr. Clare. And it reinforced this question of, well, we need to know each other and our capabilities, industrial, technological capabilities to, well, effectively create this EDTIB. Mr. Moinard, maybe.
Yes, thank you. My comment will more be philosophical because in all this this struggling that we are living every day in order to innovate and provide the soldiers with more efficiency, we must not lose of sight that what interest does the technical improvement have. I just will provide you with one example of one conversation I was reported last week. This aircraft will have, I will not give the name of the aircraft because this aircraft is designed as a known C2. Okay, is the pilot qualified as a C2 commander? No. So where's the efficiency? Where's the saving? This is the typical example of the way that we must not lose. The end user must be at the center of our own reflections.
Thank you so much. Is there, another question? I will maybe take 2 or 3 questions in a row. So do not hesitate to raise your arm. And the same thing on Zoom. If you have any question, please feel free to ask it through the Q&A. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Umit Kayan from AmCham, and I would like to follow up on the digital question. The data-driven technologies, Mr. Koch, that you described, the AFCAS, is really changing the way war fighting is conducted. And it really touches upon the human element that was mentioned. So what role can industry play in this ever-widening gap between the human element and the technology? And there's another side to this. On the other side of the Atlantic, the United States, it is really a live debate. The cloud, the artificial intelligence is really changing the way how the US military is looking at warfare in general. So there's this widening, ever widening gap on the both sides of the Atlantic. So what role, I know it's an industry debate, can industry play now so that this widening gap stops at a certain point? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other question at this stage? Or no, not for the moment. Who would like to take the question? Mr. Kaur.
You have addressed me. You're perfectly right. Digitalization must be anthropocentric or it would fail. So there is, so to say, we need to have, and this has 2 aspects. It has 2 E's. It has ergonomy, technology that is designed in such a way that human beings are able to master complexity, to tame complexity. That's one aspect. And the other E is ethics. We have to design technical systems in such a way that it's responsible use, even if it's highly automated. And this will be necessary. High automation will be necessary. I'm avoiding the notion of autonomy, but high automation will be there. And I think for us engineers, it is the great challenge in mastering this is ethically aligned engineering. We have to translate legal and ethical requirements in such a way that they become principles of systems engineering. We don't need discussions about ethics at a philosophical level because it's known. Now we have to translate it into sound engineering. And this is an activity which is seen also in the civil environment. An autonomous car is a potentially lethal weapon systems in an urban environment. It's not designed to be lethal, but it may be lethal. But on an engineering level, it's the same problem. The same problem also in medical applications, Industry 4.0 or whatever. And I see at the IEEE level, the global engineering level, that there are activities called ethically aligned engineering. And there is currently even a standardization process going on, the P7000 standard process model. The IEEE is a standardization organization. Also, Nato is a standardization organization in a way. And so I think there is it's not so different between the American thinking and the European thinking in being aware that we have to be careful with our technologies. Also from a military perspective, soldiers want to be the masters of their slaves, of the machines, so to say. They do not want to bring machines into the battlefields where they cannot be quite sure of what they are actually doing. So the problem of these don't tell me why, the deep learning things, and also counter AI, our enemies may greatly disturb our AI capabilities. So there is also a great need for clear certification and qualification of weapon systems. So modern digitalization technologies need to be certified, and the ethical aspects and ergonomic aspects, being the human being, being the master of his slaves. I'm provocative, I know, but I think these are things, not somebody. We're speaking of artificial intelligence. These are things. Even if they speak, they are things, and we are some body, and those are some things. That's very important. And we need to have these certification processes having in mind quite at the beginning. It's a matter of winning or failure. They're very important. Humans have to be in the center of our considerations, even more so if the technology is so powerful.
Thank you, Mr. Kor. Mr. Ripoche, you wanted to react?
Maybe regarding the question of the gap between US and Europe, I think that's a good example where we think there is value, and that's the whole thing about the innovation reinforcement in EDA is that through EU cooperation, then you will have a focus at EU level and not member states' unitary efforts that are probably too small to tackle a big challenge. And just this point that was mentioned, our last innovation prize was on man-machine teaming, to put it broadly. And that was the most successful prize ever in terms of participation and good ideas. And that's also the start of our reflection that we had good ideas. We have an excellent landscape in both startups, big industry, research, academia in Europe. And then you need to step up, to scale up. And that's also, we saw this with this case, and very good synergies with the civil sector, because one of the winners was also addressing the data overload for a civilian pilot, not only for an air fighter. So you have a lot of synergies. Then we see the value in using the right instrument at the right time at EU level. Then you both share the risk and share the success if it goes well. So that's how I'm at least.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Clear, do you want to add something maybe? Okay, thank you. So we have still time for one or two questions. I see that we have questions from, but I have not them on my iPad. So I will read them. One question from Pavel Fletcher. How do you think the European and transatlantic defense industry will be affected by the Nato Innovation Fund and Defense Innovation Accelerator? And how do you evaluate this initiative at this point? So the question of the articulation with NATO initiative, which is quite key indeed. And another question from Simona Suare. Three questions, and I don't know if you can read them because I cannot really do the four. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So it will be easier this way. So do the four nations have plans to expand the testing, evaluation, verification, validation capacity, especially for EDTs probably? Do the four nations have different specific assessment of human talent needs to adopt and scale EDTs in military applications? And last but not least, new model of partnership were mentioned. How do four nations think about expanding VC funding in supporting especially early stage innovation in startups? So very different questions, very different focus. I don't know how you want to respond. Maybe I can propose to Mr. Preslavsky to take the floor the first.
I'm not an expert in NATO, obviously, or unfortunately. Yeah. From what I understand, of course, it is still work in progress. So there is no clear definition of all the little details about the implementation of both defense innovation and the innovation fund of NATO. But what is really important, and I think I mentioned it during my intervention, is really at the end of the process, what we do in the European Commission, what the EDA does, what NATO does, is to have a coherent arsenal, if I may use in the defense industry, arsenal of tools and instruments which are not duplicating, where we have our own added values from the Commission with the funding, with the project management side, from the EDF with the knowledge of NATO. And this is as far as I can go in terms of clarifying this.
Maybe on the question of the VC funding, on the venture capital funding, because it refers to other, I mean, European Commission competencies in terms of, well, capital markets, EU capital markets, and so on, and linking them to, well, defense ecosystems. Do you have plans to, well, ensure close ties between these kind of initiatives and I mean the needs of defense industry and defense ecosystems?
I would refer maybe to the Versailles Declaration, because we enter now interesting times, as I said, and we have this task from the member state that by mid-May, the Commission, with the coordination with the EDA, of course, will put forward an analysis of the defense investment gaps. So mid-May is practically tomorrow. So for the administration, it is quite a challenging task, but I would just recommend that you follow closely the developments there. And there will be clear, interesting things that will happen, not in months, not in years, but really in weeks' time.
Thank you so much. Maybe either on the relationship with NATO or on EDTs, I don't know who of you gentlemen wants to take the floor. Franz Kleher?
Well, I think in general, and come back to what I said before, is cooperation is not only something within the EU. That is the cooperation that we already had for many, many years in NATO is evenly important, I would say. So it's not a matter of EU or NATO, it's a matter of EU and NATO. Specifically, and I give the example of missile defense because I've been doing a lot of NATO work in that area for 15 years. I'm a bit surprised by some of the discussions that currently are going on within the EDF and the Twister PESCO group about missile defense and Europe and blah, blah, blah. And they act as if NATO doesn't exist, which is a wrong idea. And I know that there are political issues which makes it not even very easy to cooperate, but we need to look at those. But the EU doesn't have any space-based capabilities to detect the launch of a missile. The eyes and ears in missile defense are provided by the US. So you can build missiles, you can build the command and control systems, but if you don't see them coming, you're too late. So that's something where NATO and the EU really need to work together, not by duplicating things, but I would say by strengthening existing capabilities. So a space-based solution for Europe would strengthen the autonomy of Europe to a certain level, but also make the NATO capability and the EU capability together more redundant. Because if one fails, at least somebody else can take over. So we shouldn't forget that. About duplication, I would be careful about using that word, because somebody mentioned it earlier at the early days when, and I was Sherpa during the writing of the GOP report. So I know a bit of what happened there. And I saw the pictures of all the different tanks and aircraft and ships in Europe compared to the US. I always say, if I look on the street, I see all kinds of different looking cars, but most of the cars have the same engine. They have the same tires. They have the same exhaust. They have the same gearboxes, all in that car. So be careful what you show on a picture. Sometimes there's more commonality between different looking things than you would expect in real life. Don't mix those two. So that's important. And coming back to also NATO working, I know that in NATO we've done several experiments with nations to see whether technologies, when they were integrated in a capability, in a missile defense capability or anything else, whether it would work, whether it would provide the added value and the added effect that we needed to have. Because it's all about effects. That's what you want to achieve. And you can do that in a virtual environment easily. We've been working on a very disputed thing in the Netherlands, the new submarine. You can build that submarine in a almost digital world, to use that word, and then do all kinds of testing without a real ship. And that learns you how to adapt. One of the things that we came across was, why do a submarine needs a periscope? Of course, you want to see what's happening above the sea level, but do I need a periscope? Can I use a small camera that takes a 360 picture and then comes back? No trailing in the water, nothing. Oh, that's a good idea. So we take out the periscope and we'll take the picture, and you want to show the picture. But if it's a 360 picture, you need to have something for 360 in your command center. Have you ever seen a command center with something as a circle inside? No, it's squares. So it comes back to the human factors, it comes back to design, and you can talk and work with these solutions and test them to see how valuable they are without spending an awful lot of money. And train people, see how the technology fits also in the human factor. And that's one of the things that we did also in the Dutch frigates. And they sail with about 20% less manning than similar ships around the world, because smart design of the command center and other layouts. So the combination of technology, human factor, and testing and playing with it in a virtual environment is key for the success in the future, I would say.
Thank you so much. Mr. Ripoche and then Mr. Cor.
Yes, thank you. Now, a few words about relationship with NATO. Well, first, at working level, we have a very good relationship. And already on innovation, on what's existing, and I think the kind of information that we exchange allow us to make sure that there is no, gross duplication, that we, for example, exactly run the same innovation prize at the same time on the same topic. That would be useless. But then we inform ourselves about the topics, who won, what are the good ideas. We plan to, ACT offered us a seat on their evaluation panel. We'll do the same for them on our innovation prize. So, 22 EU member states are also allies. So, as I said, in the spirit of innovation here, it will be really openness so that the good solutions are available to everybody, with the question of freedom of use, freedom of maintenance, and all those things. So, I don't really see an issue here, actually. And being, I think, a bit experienced in the technology world, I mean, don't put all your eggs in the same basket also, at the early stages at least, and see how the solutions evolve is also always a good idea. Then maybe I'll say a word about the test centers. Yeah, for sure, that's a really, we have not discussed this at length, but the ability to experiment, to test in Europe is very important. We already have in EDA a group here, so the landscaping of the capabilities, I think, is done. How we will involve them, support them in the innovation process is still to be designed, but there's work in progress with the Commission on Technological Challenges. So of course, yeah, we need to have these capabilities, and in all domains, traditional ones, energetic materials is still a rare expertise, and in new ones, digital and also simulation.
Thank you so much. Mr. Core.
I believe the European Union could profit from NATO. I'm not addressing NATO in general, but the NATO Science and Technology Organization. If we speak of innovation, then this STO really has created over the years an excellent networks among the defense scientists in all the people. The NATO STO is perhaps not the engine that really produces in-depth research. No action, travel, and talk only. This is what is often said. But this talk among the defense scientists is extremely important. The community at the defense scientists level knows each other very well. And very often activities at the NATO STO levels have led to bilateral or trilateral cooperation, which then really goes into in-depth defense research. So it would be a good advice from my perspective if the European Commission, if European Defense Agency or all these bodies would use this excellent network of defense scientists. So we meet at NATO STO meetings, we meet at IEEE meetings, and these networks already exist. Profit from them.
Thank you so much.
If I may, yeah, I think we already do, and I really concur to what you said, that many projects that were run in EDA were born in STO. So because we know member states have a single set of experts, so we don't want to duplicate those meetings at all, but really build on them. So for sure.
Thanks for this precision, and maybe Mr. Moinard, and we will then conclude.
Okay, just I will not deal for a long time with NATO because both structures are complementary one to the other, and it's so obvious that I will not enter into details. I would rather talk about the testing, which of course needs a lot of evolution, and for my experience, because I know well the test and evaluation centers of the French MOD. I know it's a daily concern. They already are focusing on the need for tests for the following years, and sometimes the answers to their questions are not acceptable due to their cost. But anyway, we'll go further. And as a matter of a personal conclusion, I would like to remind you all of last year EDA's annual conference, where one of the concerns was the possible lack of skilled human resource, because it seems like we are going to feel like all these skilled people are becoming more and more precious. And I think it's not only in their way of being skilled, but in their quantity too.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moinard, and I will take this opportunity to thank our 5 speakers today for this very interesting discussion. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I will now let the floor to Jean-Pierre Molny, which have the difficult task to conclude this conference, and especially as he will be between you and the buffet. So Jean-Pierre, the floor is yours.
Don't worry, I don't conclude the seminar. No, I am not to deliver a conclusion. I hope that the presentation of the panelists and the debate with the QA session gave you satisfaction on the key strategic topic, which is defense innovation for the future of European defense, European armament, and also European capabilities. But just a few words on the future work program of RS. As we had a meeting with our board and scientific advisor, Bastien leave us, but he was at the meeting yesterday. Dick Zandi is here, and we have a wide panel of scientific advisors all around the European Union working with us and to define this work program together. First of all, at the entrance of the room, you will find a paper which is not still published. It will be published at the end of the week. It is those of Daniel Fiot and Michalis Ketselidis on EU civil defense synergies, understanding the challenge and driver of change. So it's a paper after the communication on synergy last year to see what will go further on this question. Second, today you will see that we have this exchange on the extra defense spendings and the question between short-term and long-term investments. So we want to launch the debate on this question by publishing in the European newspapers a paper, so advertising that it must lead to more Europe and not less Europe. And we have planned also to follow up this first paper with an RS paper on what could be a defense package 3 after or during the Ukraine war, and which initiative we can have to use this extra national spending and in the best way possible. And so perhaps to go further on the question of joint procurement. Other topics of RWESH, we have launched a national command series on critical technology and industrial capabilities, and we have in mind a policy paper on the synergies between strategic compass and other EU initiatives. The last debate, it was on the question of Nato and EU, and we plan also a policy paper on the respective role of NATO and EU on armament and defense innovation and within the global question of NATO-EU relationship. And we will tackle also the question of the financing all the DTIB, and also we plan to go further in organizing a quick webinar during the lunch time and with advertising at a short delay. So last thing is simple to tell you that the buffet lunch is on the ground floor. So thank you to all for your participation, for the panelists, but also for your questions.